Novel Empire. Immortal God of Battle. Chapter 241. Spare no pains. Ha! Jiang Qing screamed hysterically. The rocks moved again. 5.1 meters. 5.2 meters. 5.3 meters. Jiang Qing finally couldn't hold on and fell to the ground. He couldn't even stand up anymore. Seeing this scene, Xiang Nan and the others were extremely speechless. In order to surpass 5 meters, he seemed to have secretly burned his blood essence just now, didn't he? Feng Zhaoqi held the sword and whispered to the side. Xiang Nan and Muron Wanqing both nodded, but did not say anything. Indeed, Elder Shi Beihong did not stipulate that he could not burn his blood essence. However, burning blood essence consumed a lot of martial artists. It was not something that could be recovered after consuming the rejuvenation pill. If the amount of burning was small, it would take at least a day or two to recover. If it burned too much, it could even cause one's cultivation to fall backwards. That Jiang became the limelight, he really did not hesitate to pay any price. I'll do it. Muron Wanqing walked up and finally pushed the rock 5 meters away, the same result as Yi Dong. Xiang Nan knew that she hadn't used her full strength. Other people didn't know, but Xiang Nan knew that there was still a spiritual fire hidden within her body. After that, Feng Zhaoqi pushed the mountain stones 4.8 meters away. Luo Yuan and Feng Zhaoqi had the same result of 4.8 meters. Shen Linhai was 4.9 meters, and Jiang Yu was a little over 4.6 meters. The Chu clan's Chu Yan was quite outstanding, pushing the mountain stones 5.1 meters away. She was currently ranked second. Zhou Xianyong was an expert of the sword sect, pushing the mountain stones by 5.1 meters, tied with Chu Yan for second place. When they arrived at Hongbin, they staged a spectacular performance. After Hongbin pushed the mountain stones to 5 meters, he suddenly shouted, and the terrifying primordial dipper chi condensed into a fierce tiger. The ferocious tiger enveloped Hongbin's entire body. The giant tiger's head fiercely pressed against the mountain rocks, and its limbs violently scratched the ground. The disciples of all the sects cried out loudly. Ha! When the rock was pushed to 5.3 meters, Hongbin let out a low shout, and then the fierce tiger let out a tiger roar that shook the entire arena. Rumble! Shanshi walked further until he reached 5.4 meters, 5.5 meters. Afterwards, the fierce tiger also reached its limit, and with a single sound, it dissipated into specks of light that filled the sky. We've reached our limit. Hongbin took a deep breath and slowly retreated. Waves after waves of cries of alarm echoed in the audience, and a new record was set. At present, the first place was Hongbin's 5.5 meters, the second place was Jiang Cheng's 5.3 meters, and the third place was Zhou Xianyong and Chu Yan's 5.1 meters. At this moment, everyone's gazes fell on Xiang Nan alone. Hongbin and Jiang Qingdu hugged their shoulders and looked coldly at Xiang Nan. Last time in the cultivation tower, they had made things difficult for Xiang Nan. This time, they were even harboring ill intentions. "Kid, aren't you very capable?" Jiang Qing sneered, "You were so handsome and glorious in the written examination. Come, I'll see how capable you are in the martial examination. Can your lightning meridian's talent help you?" Ha 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 ha. The lightning meridian's attribute was most powerful because of its explosive power. However, it didn't play a strong role in pushing the mountain stones, because what was needed to push the mountain stones was a deep and enduring strength. Moreover, another characteristic of lightning power was that it could paralyze the enemy's yuan qi to a certain extent, but it was useless against rocks. What? He has the lightning meridian's talent. Heavens, he must be the #1 person on the Eagle rankings, right? The outer sect disciples began to whisper in succession. Everyone knew that there was only one person in the first team on the Eagle rankings. This mysterious member of the Sons had become a hot topic of discussion in the past 2 days. After Xiang Nan won the first place in the written examination, many people began to inquire about Xiang Nan's identity. A few people knew that Xiang Nan was the only member of the Sons. This news spread further and further. At this time, more than half of the people already knew about Xiang Nan's identity. The first place on the Eagle rankings, the Lightning Meridian's talent, and the first place in the written examination had already made Xiang Nan the focus of attention on the scene. This was the result of the news that the Haoran sect had sent the Heavenly Demon sect to propose marriage. Otherwise, the sensation would have been even greater. Xiang Nan, you should finally use your full strength, right? Mo Hai hugged his shoulders. He was also very curious about Xiang Nan's strength. Under everyone's attention, Xiang Nan took a deep breath and walked forward. He pushed the rock with both hands and began to rumble forward. Unsurprisingly, without using any external force, he pushed the rock to 2 meters with his own strength. However, right after that, he still didn't erupt, but was still pushing. The rock continued to walk. This Jiang Cheng and Hong Bin exchanged glances, both feeling incredulous. How could the miraculous effects of a Tier 4 body refining pill be said to be a joke? Xiang Nan was still advancing. 2.1 meters, 2.3 meters, 2.5 meters. 2.6 meters, 2.7 meters, 2.9 meters. 3 meters. The scene suddenly boiled. Xiang Nan was the first person to push the mountain stones to 3 meters by relying on strength alone. His strength has increased so terrifyingly. Murong Wanqing was also shocked. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and his arms trembled. A surging yuan qi surged out. The mountain rock that had stopped 3 meters away continued to advance. 3.3 meters, 3.5 meters, 3.9 meters, 4 meters. Xiang Nan had been holding back his breath in order to prove it to Hong Bin and Jiang Cheng. At 4 meters, Yuan Qi was no longer able to provide any more impetus, and Xiang Nan's body suddenly shook. A thin ray of sunlight descended from the sky and landed directly on his back shoulder. The strong light was transmitted from his back shoulder to his arms. A pair of radiant arms pushed the mountain stones and continued walking. 4.3 meters, 4.5 meters, 4.9 meters, 5 meters. At this time, Xiang Nan was no longer able to move the mountain rock. He felt as if he was pushing a real mountain peak. After all, he was only at the 3rd level of origin return, and there was nothing he could do about his cultivation. However, being able to accomplish this step was also very impressive. Murong Wanqing was able to push 5 meters because even though she did not release the spiritual fire, the power of the spiritual fire still increased Yuan Qi. Moreover, her heavenly grade fire veins were also functioning. Although her fire veins were famous for their explosive power, they were not weak in sustainability. However, Xiang Nan's lightning meridian's attribute had no effect at this time. It could be imagined that a ball of flame could burn all the time, but lightning cut through the horizon and disappeared in a flash. But Xiang Nan was unwilling. Body tyrant lightning drive. He shouted in his heart, and the strength in his body instantly increased 5-fold. Rumble. The rocks continued to walk. 5.1 meters, 5.2 meters. It had already surpassed the results of Zhou Xianyong and Chu Yan. 5.3 meters. Damn it! Jiang Cheng's face turned green and red, and his eyes turned red with anger. He shouted for a long time, but in the end, Xiang Nan caught up with Jiang Cheng's results. Ah, what a fantasy! The outer sect disciples cried out in alarm, isn't he at the third level of the origin return realm? How could this be the strength a third level of the origin return realm martial artist should have? However, after 5.3 meters, Xiang Nan reached his limit again. At this moment, Xiang Nan took a deep breath when everyone thought that Xiang Nan was ready to give up. A beam of sunlight 4 meters in diameter. From heavens. And surrender. Chapter 242 4 Skills Stunning. If you want to do it best. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth fiercely, almost shattering them. The 4-meter-long daylight exploded on Xiang Nan's body, enveloping his entire body. At this moment, Xiang Nan's hair had turned white, and his eyes shone with dazzling light. Shan Shi, let's go. 5.4 meters. 5.5 meters. He had already caught up to Hongbin. Pine. A pair of enormous Yuan Qi feathered wings suddenly spread out behind Xiang Nan. Each of the Yuan Qi feathered wings had an astonishing length of 5 meters. The 2 pairs of large wings flapped high and hard, causing the dust on the scene to fly and the rubble to scatter everywhere. 5.6 meters. A new record has been set. This brat wants to go against the heavens. Luo Yuan, Shen Linhai and the others were dumbfounded. No, it's not enough. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and continued to push. 5.7 meters. 5.8 meters. The rock had already been pushed by Xiang Nan to an astonishing distance of 5.8 meters. Even Mu Sueki's eyes widened, and she was shocked. This Xiang Nan's strength had increased by an unknown amount since the last time. Ayayawiawa. Refining qi into electricity. Xiang Nan roared in his heart. Boom! A huge ball of lightning suddenly swelled out from Xiang Nan's body and wrapped around him. Tyrant body lightning drive, sun god technique, qi refinement to lightning. The 3 forces merged into one. In this instant, Xiang Nan suddenly pushed the mountain rock to a full 6 meters. Countless outer sect disciples and Haran sect disciples who were observing the exam all raised their heads and their eyeballs almost flew out of their sockets. Not to mention being completely silent, they had forgotten to breathe. Everyone's spirits had collapsed to the extreme. A slight provocation would cause them to feel as if they would collapse. Nervous. Incomparably nervous. Because everyone could see that Xiang Nan still had no intention of stopping. Last. White flame blazing lightning. Song, long, out, see. Boom. Xiang Nan's area instantly exploded, and white lightning shot out. Lightning arcs wrapped around his entire body. At that moment, Xiang Nan placed his shoulder on the mountain rock and directly sent the azure dragon out to sea. The mountain stones flew back with a loud rumble. That's right, it's just flying back. 6.3 meters, 6.5 meters, 6.7 meters. In the end, Xiang Nan used his right arm to press against the rock, releasing his last move, drawing the saber and slashing. He used his arm as a knife and raised his entire arm into the sky. A green dragon mixed with sun god technique, tyrannical body lightning drive, and white flame lightning exploded out of the sea. The mountain rock was instantly blasted 7 meters away. At this point, Xiang Nan stopped, turned around and bowed to Shi Beihong. Elder, I can't move anymore, he said respectfully. Good, good, very good. Elder Shi Beihong stroked his beard and smiled. Xiang Nan nodded and retreated under the shocked gazes of everyone present. Only at this moment did the scene explode, and shouts of alarm swept over the sky. Ha! That's Xiang Nan, he's from our Bluestone City. Li Qingchuan excitedly waved his arm and roared, it's an expert from our Bluestone City. Ha 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 ha! Bravo! Mo Hai excitedly waved his fist in the air. 7 meters. He broke everyone's record and far surpassed Hong Bin, who was ranked second, by a distance of 1.5 meters. Elder Shi Beihong announced on the spot, right now, the results are in front of everyone. I believe there is no longer any dispute. Xiang Nan is the first place in the pre-competition exam. He got 100 points. Following that, Elder Shi Beihong was still announcing the scores for second and third place, but no one was listening. Everyone's attention was focused on Xiang Nan. With the first place, who would care about the results of the second place? Jiang Cheng's expression was as if he had eaten a dead child. It was hard to see his grandmother's house. Hong Bin narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, this brat has probably taken out all his trump cards. However, that's good. It doesn't matter if I let him be arrogant first. We all retain our trump cards, but he doesn't have any trump cards. This is a huge advantage for us in the 12-sec joint examination. The pre-competition examination had already ended, and the examination hall had also begun to open to the outside world. Countless sect disciples poured into the examination area. Everyone went up one after another and tried to push the magical mountain rock forward. Ah, shit! This mountain rock is so heavy. An outer sect disciple pushed the mountain stones and cried out in alarm, I just pushed half a meter and I feel like my body is going to collapse. Then how did Xiang Nan push it 7 meters away? It's simply inconceivable. It's my turn. Quickly, it's my turn to push. The nearby sect disciples hurriedly urged. Another person said, when Xiang Nan exploded with strength, a ray of sunlight shone down. What kind of terrifying cultivation technique was that? Why haven't you heard of it before? Yes, someone next to him echoed, we've all heard of the techniques of the 3 sect of saber and sword chi, but what Xiang Nan uses doesn't seem to belong to any of these 3. In the noisy scene, more people surrounded Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan, what kind of cultivation technique is that? What's its name? That's right. Your pair of big wings are just for a look, or are they really capable of flying? Do you really have the lightning meridian's attribute? Let us all see it. Jiang Cheng walked past the crowd with an ugly expression. He coughed twice and tried to pull some attention on himself. After all, he had pushed 5.3 meters. This result was already very good. However, no one took another glance at Jiang Cheng. Everyone didn't even know that Jiang Cheng was beside them. Jiang Cheng was bored, then walked towards Mu Sueki and said, Sister, don't you think that Xiang Nan likes to show off too much? This kind of person is the most boring. In order to push the mountain stones further away, I actually took out all my strength. If I did the same, I would definitely. Before he could finish speaking, he awkwardly stopped, because Mu Sueki only glanced at him and lightly brushed past him. Jiang Cheng gritted his teeth angrily. He then turned to look at Xiang Nan, his eyes already filled with resentment. The hatred in this glance made one's hair stand on end. Although the scene was chaotic, the final result came out. Of the 3,200 disciples of the second grade academy, the first place was Xiang Nan. Elder Shi Beihong wasted a lot of effort to calm everyone down and announced, in the next 3 days, there will be the 12 sects joint examination. All the elders of the various sects participating in the joint examination, please lead our disciples to gather here. Don't delay the time. Let's disperse. Xiang Nan found an opportunity to escape from the crowd and was pulled away by Mo Hai and Li Qingchuan. This examination truly allowed the various sects to experience the enormous strength of the Haoran sect. Countless disciples had unprecedented hopes for the Haoran sect, desperately wanting to obtain a good result in the 12 joint examinations. The reason for that was because the Haoran sect had made a promise as the host of the 12 joint examinations. No matter which sect's disciples were, as long as they had the ability to enter the top 100, they would be able to be accepted into the nature sect. Of course, the top 100 didn't include the Haoran sect disciples. They were referring to the comprehensive rankings of the other 11 sects. For example, if Mo Hai obtained the 120th place in the 12 joint examinations, but 21 of them were Haoran sect disciples, then Mo Hai's actual outer sect ranking would be 99. He would also be accepted by the Haoran sect as an exception. Chapter 243 Audition Elimination. The 12 joint examinations had brought unprecedented popularity to the Haoran sect, and at the same time, they had brought enormous benefits to Haotian City. When the outer sect first arrived at the Haoran sect, what everyone was most interested in was the Haoran sect itself. Almost everyone was running around in the Haoran sect. However, a few days later, more and more people shifted their interest to Haotian City. This was because they would sell precious spiritual herbs and precious artifact forging materials that they could not normally see or buy. During the 3 days of rest, a large number of outer sect disciples poured into Haotian City and began to buy large quantities of items. Meanwhile, the outer sect elders entered the Haoran palace and began discussing a long-term plan with the Haoran sect elders. After this joint examination, the Haoran sect would send a few elders to teach martial arts to the outer sect as guest lecturers from the other 11 sects. The 11 sects also gave the Haoran sect more convenience. In the future, if the Haoran sect disciples went out on missions, they could directly treat the 11 outer sects as affiliated sects. After entering, they could enjoy the treatment of core disciples. Xiang Nan took advantage of these 3 days to rest. In the blink of an eye, the 12 joint examinations had arrived. All the sect elders participating in the joint examination brought their own disciples to the entrance of the Haoran palace. The people from the other 50 sects came even earlier, arriving before dawn, all of them spiritedly preparing to watch the spectacular joint exam. The total number of outer sect disciples participating in the 12 sect joint examination this time was 1,300, and the total number of Haoran sect disciples was 1,500. Only today did Elder Shi Beihong announce that the examination hall would be located in the Haoran mountain range outside the Haoran sect. Afterwards, flying demonic beasts rushed into the sky, bringing nearly 100,000 people into the mountains. The entrance exam hall was located at the western end of the Haoran mountain range, next to the Haoran sect, in an open canyon. As for the spectators' seats, they were directly set up on the mountain peaks on both sides. Nearly 100,000 people were seated on both sides of the mountain peak. Looking at the valley from here, they could not see anything clearly, let alone a small martial artist competing inside. This joint exam was similar to the Bluestone City selection. It directly set up a huge barrier of light. This barrier had a visual amplification effect, allowing the audience to clearly see and hear the people they were paying attention to from a distance. Of course, only martial artists could do this. They had to inject their yuan qi into the barrier and aim it at the person they were paying attention to. Only then could they obtain vision and hearing. Apart from that, there was no noise. This caused ordinary people who did not possess Yuan Qi to lose their way of watching the battle. This was a feast for martial artists. At this moment, all the participating disciples were already standing in the valley inside the barrier. Elder Shi Beihong stepped into the air and stood high up in the air. He poured his Yuan Qi into his voice and said, "Through the joint discussion of the 12 sects elders, it has been decided that the 12 sects joint examination will officially begin today." As soon as he finished speaking, the audience applauded loudly and cheered everywhere. The vast number of merchants from Haotian City had also arrived. They were shuttling back and forth in the spectator stands, selling all kinds of delicacies and drinks. This was also a good opportunity to make a fortune. Afterwards, Elder Shi Beihong announced the reward system in advance. The top 10 disciples of the 12 sects joint examination will receive an Earth Grade Intermediate Grade martial skill, an Earth Grade High Grade weapon, and a Grade 5 medicinal pill, with a mysterious reward. Hearing this, countless people became excited. That was an Earth Grade Intermediate Grade martial skill. Such a level of martial skill was difficult to obtain even in the Haoran sect. As for weapons and pills, they were treasures that could be encountered but could not be sought. As for what the mysterious reward was, no one could guess for a moment. It should be better than these 3 rewards. Following that was the outer sect reward. Those who entered the 100 outer sect could enter the nature sect and be qualified to participate in the second 12th consecutive examination. Amid the enthusiastic atmosphere, Shi Beihong announced that the reward system was over, and that was the rules of the competition. The entire 12 sect joint exam was divided into 3 parts. The first segment was the additions elimination tournament. They were divided into 10 groups, each with 150 people. In the end, 75 people were eliminated from each group, a total of 750 people were eliminated. The second segment was the team competition. It was divided into 10 groups. Each group consisted of 15 teams. Each team consisted of 5 people. 11 teams were eliminated from each group, and the remaining 4 teams consisted of 550 people and 200 people. The third segment was the arena competition, where 200 people fought until the end of the joint examination. After hearing the rules of the competition, all the outer sect disciples who participated in the joint examination heaved a sigh of relief. It could be said that there was no longer any written examination. Next, 10 sect elders will be the judges of the joint examination with me. There were a total of 11 referees in the joint entrance examination. Among them, Shi Beihong was the chief referee. Of the other 10 referees, 8 were elders from second-class sects, 1 was recommended by 3 third-class sects, and the last was an elder from the Haoran sect. Then now, Elder Shi Beihong clapped his hands and said, "I declare that the 12 consecutive examinations have officially begun. Next, let's proceed to the first round, the additions elimination round. All participants, please draw lots and choose your own group." 12 sects and 12 lines lined up to draw lots. Xiang Nan stood in the queue of the Haoran sect and took out a number plate from the referee box on his side with the words 10 written on it. "How many are you, the 10th group?" Murong Wanqing glanced at the number plate in Xiang Nan's hand. "Yes." Xiang Nan nodded and looked at Murong Wanqing's number plate. He found that there was a 1 written on it. The 2 of them were at the 2 ends. At this time, someone in the spectator stand suddenly shouted, "Come on, Xiang Nan. Come on, Murong Wanqing. Win honor for our first grade academy." The 2 of them turned around at the same time and couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that it was the students from the previous first grade academy. "All right. As the referee, Elder Shi Beihong announced in the sky, "You have all received your own group numbers. Prepare to enter the arena now." As he spoke, Elder Shi Beihong raised his hands high. Immediately after, the enormous valley suddenly shook. One could see that 10 enormous rings had actually appeared on the vast land. Afterwards, those rings actually rose from the ground. They turned into floating mountains. Countless people cried out in shock. How powerful was Shi Beihong? He was actually able to dig out 10 mountains from the ground with every move he made. Every mountain had a flat top and bottom, and there was still mud and gravel falling from the bottom. The silent mountain peaks floated in the air so steadily that the scene was incomparably spectacular. Heavens, Li Qingchuan was speechless. "Let alone let me build 10 mountains, even if I were to break one of them, it would probably take a few days and nights." Chapter 244 I Have Birds. Ordinary people were filled with envy when they saw that martial artists could easily move thousands of kilograms of boulders. Body-tempering realm martial artists saw the weather before them, Xiantian realm martial artists saw Yuan Qi, and Origin realm martial artists would be shocked to see Tian Yuan realm martial artists roaming the 9 heavens. In the world of martial arts, every time he saw a stronger expert's ability, his heart would be filled with boundless longing, fantasizing about how powerful he would be after reaching that stage. Elder Shi Beihong moved 10 mountains with every move, proving to everyone that the path of martial arts was long and far-reaching, and it was worthy of everyone's painstaking pursuit. 10 mountains were floating in the air, and all the participating disciples were lined up neatly, ready to set off. Elder Shi Beihong waved his hand again and countless broken stones flew in 10 directions in an orderly manner. In midair, he quickly listed out 10 wide stone stairs. The 10 stone stairs led to the 10 flat-topped floating mountains, and many disciples stepped onto them. These 10 floating mountains were 100 meters away from the ground, but the height of the mountain itself was 500 meters. Without the stone stairs, ordinary martial artists wouldn't be able to jump that high. At this height, it had undoubtedly become one of the places for many powerful martial artists to display themselves. 99% of the disciples at the scene were obediently walking up the stone stairs, but some of the martial artists had to find a different path. A blazing fire sect martial artist with the strength of the 4th level of Origin returned clasped his fists and said to his group of disciples, "Everyone, let's go first and show our embarrassment." With that, Yuan Qi burst out from beneath his feet, and he bounced into the sky with a loud boom. Everyone looked over in astonishment. The martial artist leapt to a height of 70 to 80 meters. At this moment, his ascent momentum had already reached its peak. Immediately after, he threw out a strand of Yuan Qi and stuck to the bottom of the floating mountain. With the help of his Yuan Qi, he climbed another 70 to 80 meters, then threw his Yuan Qi to stick to the mountain and continued to rise. After several consecutive times, he successfully reached the top. This should be the first show of the 12 consecutive examinations, and all the spectators applauded warmly. The high jump was not always proportional to strength. Many people had such common sense. For example, an ordinary skinny man could jump more than a meter tall, while another strong man who was 3 times stronger than the skinny man could still jump more than a meter tall, not 3 meters tall. With the help of Yuan Qi, Origin realm martial artists were able to jump up to a vertical height of 50 meters, while jumping horizontally was about 200 to 300 meters away. This was already considered quite good. With this person leading the way, even more powerful martial artists felt that climbing the stone stairs was too shameful, so they all followed suit. A Qingyun sect Guiyuan 3rd layer martial artist also poured Yuan Qi into his legs. He jumped abruptly, but he only jumped more than 50 meters. However, he was still more than 50 meters away from the bottom of the mountain. The martial artist hurriedly threw out a beam of Yuan Qi. However, the length of the Yuan Qi was not enough, and it almost reached the bottom of the mountain. He saw this person helplessly fall down from mid-air again. The spectators on both sides of the mountain immediately laughed and booed. As for the disciple of the Azure Cloud sect, his face was red and his ears were red. He could only obediently follow the crowd up the stone stairs. "I'll do it." Luo Yuan laughed out loud and jumped up from the ground. He was more than 100 meters tall and was as flat as the bottom of the mountain. Immediately after, he sent out a palm strike with his right hand and borrowed strength to jump again. Then, another palm strike, and then another jump. 3 jumps and 5 jumps also reached the top of the mountain. All the knowledgeable martial artists applauded Luo Yuan warmly, because he didn't use the mountain as a climbing prop at all. Although Luo Yuan's method and principle were very simple, experts knew that it was even harder to do it. This was because the recoil from releasing Yuan Qi was far from as strong as everyone had imagined. Otherwise, wouldn't a martial artist be bouncing back without a trace when he sliced out a strong blade light that could split a mountain and split a rock? Therefore, at this time, what was being considered was the power of Luo Yuan's palm technique. Obviously, he was extremely outstanding. Beautiful. Shen Linhai roared, "It's my turn." After saying that, Shen Linhai also rose from the ground, but on the ground where he jumped, there was a cloak of Yuan Qi condensing. Immediately after, that Yuan Qi suddenly erupted, resembling a rising sea wave, supporting Shen Linhai all the way up to the top of the mountain. The applause sounded like a tsunami. Shen Linhai was even more outstanding, and he did not pause once. Then there was Muron Wanqing. She only lightly jumped 3 meters high, but a ball of Yuan Qi flames appeared beneath her feet. The flames suddenly exploded, and the terrifying impact turned her body into an illusory image. The illusory image directly soared to the top of the mountain, and its speed was extremely fast. Everyone was filled with envy. This was the power of the heavenly grade fire vein. The explosive power of the fire attribute caused countless people to covet it. Jiang Yu of the Qi sect also jumped up. The Yuan Qi beneath her feet exploded, and she jumped more than 300 meters. Immediately after, he threw out a 100-meter-long beam of Yuan Qi, sticking to the mountain. He borrowed his strength to jump again and jumped twice to the top of the mountain. The applause was still warm. As expected of a disciple of the Qi sect, the length of the Yuan Qi rainbow had already reached an unbelievable level. At this moment, everyone looked at Feng Zhaoqi with a consonant mind. Feng Zhaoqi was still holding his sword, but his body was slightly bowed, like a ferocious beast about to pounce on its prey. Then, his legs disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. Feng Zhaoqi's body shot into the air with a whoosh. That speed made his body turn into a flickering shadow. When he looked again, he was already standing on the top of the mountain. The audience applauded like thunder. Muron Wanqing and the others did not rely on pure bouncing power to go up. Instead, they used their martial skills opportunistically. However, Feng Zhaoqi's bouncing power was real. Even Xiang Nan was shocked by this terrifying bounce. Quick! Too fast! The instant Feng Zhaoqi's legs bounced, it was so fast that no one could keep up with him. It wasn't hard to understand why every time he drew his sword, no one could see the blade of the sword and a sword light rushed out. That meant that Feng Zhaoqi was a super speed expert. Fast legs, faster hands. At this moment, the roar of a ferocious tiger came from the canyon. Hongbin helped him run, and the Yuan Qi in his body condensed into a giant tiger of light. The tiger enveloped him and pounced into the sky. The shocking power also caused him to land directly on the mountain peak. Then came Jiang Qing, Zhou Xianyong, and the others' performances. These people used their own methods to climb to the top of the mountain. In the end, no matter if it was Murong Wanqing or Hongbin or Jiang Qing, they all took the initiative to look at Xiang Nan. As a result, what they saw in front of them almost caused all the spectators to spit out a mouthful of blood. Xiang Nan grabbed a bird's leg in his hand, and the bird was struggling to flap its wings as it flew upwards. Xiang Nan shamelessly let the palm-sized bird bring him up. Under everyone's strange expressions, Xiang Nan pointed at the bird and said, "I have a bird, so I don't have to jump by myself." Chapter 245 Fight Amongst Oneself. Luo Yuan shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Hongbin and Jiang Qing looked at each other and said in unison, "This bastard seems to be laughing at us." Perhaps the contrast between the front and back was too strong. Instead, the audience gave Xiang Nan the warmest applause, and some even whistled throughout the valley. "Ha ha, so shameless. But I like it." The spectators were eating peanuts while eating melon seeds, and were happy to see such a scene to ease the tension. Next, the first round of the 12-sec joint exam, the elimination round of the additions, was about to begin. All the disciples also stepped onto the mountain peak one after another. The grouping this time was very exquisite. Before the competition, the 12 sects had already made a rough assessment of the overall strength of all the participating disciples, and focused on separating them all. Therefore, Murong Wanqing, Shen Linhai, Feng Zhaoqi, Luo Yuan, Jiang Yu, and Xiang Nan were all not assigned to the same place. Grouping was to try to separate experts of similar strength, but the same group of members were randomly selected. Xiang Nan observed the flat mountain peak and found that it was about 1,000 meters in diameter, enough for 150 people to move about. Moreover, there were trees and rocks on the mountain peak, and the terrain was not simple. At this moment, Elder Shi Beihong's voice sounded in the sky. He said, "There is no limit to slaughter in this audition elimination match. But I advise everyone in my personal capacity to spare them. Alright, 150 people in each group. 75 people in each group will be eliminated. Whether they are eliminated or not will be determined by death, falling mountains, or surrendering voluntarily. You can't maliciously kill a contestant who has surrendered. The time limit is 1 hour. Now, the audition elimination tournament will begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the cheers from the spectators swept over. The 12-sec joint exam, which attracted the attention of everyone, finally began. It was also at the same time that Elder Shi Beihong announced the start of the competition that all the contestants on the 10 mountain peaks quickly moved away from each other and scattered into various corners. Xiang Nan pulled out his huge saber and carefully observed the situation on his 10th mountain peak. The first thing he needed to do was to identify each other. There were no specific rules for this type of auditions. They could fight in chaos or fight one-on-one. It all depended on the direction of the situation. On this mountain peak in Xiang Nan, the disciples of 12 sects were disrupted, and there were people from each sect. Xiang Nan retreated all the way to the edge of the mountain peak, hundreds of meters high behind him. At present, some disciples had already begun to fight, but most of them still maintained their attitude of watching from the sidelines. At this moment, several contestants nearby had already discovered Xiang Nan, but they had all seen Xiang Nan pushing the rocks, and no one dared to provoke him. Xiang Nan fell into a quiet state and quietly observed with his huge saber on his back. Due to time constraints, the other 9 mountain peaks immediately began to fight like wildfire. Hong Bin, Jiang Cheng, and the others were all piercing figures. They were not willing to let go of this opportunity to perform. They immediately attacked at the beginning of the competition, sending the contestants flying. This was the beginning of a fuse that immediately triggered a chaotic battle. The 9 mountain peaks attracted almost all of their attention, except for the 10th peak, which no one took another glance at. The reason for that was because the overall strength of the 10th peak was the weakest. Even if Xiang Nan was a top expert in this group, he was only at the 3rd level of origin return. It could be seen that the 10th peak had already been recognized as the weakest among the 12 sects. Time ticked by. 20 minutes later, the 10th peak finally began to engage in battle. After half an hour of competition, the 4th peak, Hongbin's mountain peak, was the first to complete the competition, leaving 75 people behind and eliminating 75 people. Following that was the 1st peak where Murong Wanqing was, the 6th peak where Jiangqing was, and the 9th peak where Zhou Xianyong was. By the time they reached the 40th minute, the 1st and 9th peaks had all ended, leaving only the 10th peak. Everyone looked towards the 10th peak, their eyes filled with dissatisfaction. We can't delay any longer. Xiang Nan pulled out his giant saber, and if he continued to waste time, it was very likely that all the disciples of the 10th peak would be eliminated. Just as he was thinking of this, Xiang Nan suddenly saw a large group of people walking over from the side of the forest. They shouted all the way, as if they were gathering a team and looking for someone. "We are Haoren sect disciples. Those who don't want to be eliminated, come over and join the team immediately. Otherwise, they won't be waiting for us." At that time, a large number of contestants rushed over. Those who were strong were left behind to join the team, while those who were weak were eliminated. Seeing this, Xiang Nan frowned. He thought to himself that this group of people actually didn't forget to form a gang in the competition, but this was indeed a good choice. With the 19 Haoren sect disciples at the core, the team had already reached a total of 75 people. The more the large group walked, the closer they got to Xiang Nan. Finally, one of the Haoren sect disciples in the front row saw Xiang Nan at a glance. "Over there." The Haoren sect disciple laughed loudly. "Xiang Nan, I found you." "What?" The outer sect disciples of the team hurriedly said, "We're going to fight Xiang Nan." "Isn't that bad? We can attack the other contestants. It'll be easier that way." Hearing this, the Haoren sect disciple kicked the outer sect disciple out and shouted, "You're eliminated." Then he pointed at the disciple who was kicked to the ground and shouted, "Kill him." Under the apprentice's shocked gaze, more than a dozen contestants rushed forward, and their fists and weapons exploded randomly, forcefully killing the apprentice on the spot. Even the audience was stunned by this scene. This was simply a cruel law of existence for a small world. The minority had to obey the majority, otherwise, there would be no place for them to stand. The disciple who had been beaten to death was unable to shout a single word of surrender. None of the other 9 peaks had ever seen such a scene before. Only the 10th peak had been delayed for too long, forming the current environment that was shocking to watch. The Haoren sect disciple's true arm shouted, "Is there anyone else who doubts my words?" No one in the entire team dared to speak again. "That's good." The Haoren sect disciple pointed at Xiang Nan and shouted, "Kill him. Don't be afraid, there are many of us. No matter how powerful he is still alone." "Are you serious?" Xiang Nan narrowed his eyes and looked down on the Haoren sect disciple. He coldly said, "Such an important event, do you really want to gather so many people to deal with my fellow disciple? Shame, there's no such thing as losing it, is there? There are a total of 12 sects here. Who can't you beat up?" You want to beat up your fellow sects. At the beginning of this competition, the Haran sect was about to stage a battle between the two sects. Didn't he make everyone in the world laugh at him? Under such circumstances, Xiangnan had no choice but to get angry. Chapter 246 First Wave. In the spectator stands, Mu Sueki frowned repeatedly. Was this how the unity of the Haran sect was manifested? Someone whispered, Xiangnan's strength is obvious. Why did they choose Xiangnan as their target? That doesn't make sense. Someone whispered, perhaps because Xiangnan is too strong, they should try their best to get rid of Xiangnan when they can attack in groups, so that they won't meet again in the future. At that time, even if they want to attack Xiangnan in groups, they won't be able to do so. However, this is only my speculation. Perhaps there are other reasons. I'm not sure. After all, it's too risky to do so. Others did not know the reason, but all the students of the second grade academy of the nature sect knew the reason. Because in the entire second grade academy, there was no one who didn't hate Xiangnan. Back in the martial arts hall, Xiangnan had defeated 3 second grade students by himself. That large-scale conflict had caused second grade students to lose face, causing all second grade students to hate Xiangnan in their bones. In the distance, Hong Bin and Jiang Qing were both sneering. There was no surprise in their expressions. Obviously, they knew that the 10th peak would definitely reach this point. You guys have a plan, right? Xiangnan looked at the 74 people and said coldly. Looks like Luo Yuan was right. When he was in Drunken Dream Pavilion, Luo Yuan had already reminded Xiangnan that the second grade students were all rubbing their fists, wanting to do Xiangnan in the joint exam. Xiangnan, do you still remember me? A gloomy voice came from within the group, and then a figure shook out. This person was one of the members of Jiang Cheng's squad, the tall and thin man with a gun. When he was in Drunken Dream Pavilion, he was almost beaten to death by Xiangnan. Xiangnan looked up and laughed, good, good, good. You really have to reveal all our grudges in front of the world, so that outsiders can laugh at you. Are you afraid of saying this? The tall and thin man gritted his teeth and said coldly, if I knew earlier, you shouldn't have provoked us back then. After saying that, the tall and thin man raised his arm and shouted, little bastard Xiang is very good at melee combat. Everyone, don't get close to him. Bang him with your Yuan Qi together. As soon as he finished speaking, more than 70 people simultaneously raised their weapons and launched a long-range attack on Xiangnan. At that moment, a dazzling Yuan Qi attack poured towards Xiangnan like a tidal wave. That skinny tall man was actually so smart. No matter how strong Xiangnan was, even if he was so strong that he was heaven-defying, it was impossible for him to withstand the collective attacks of 74 Origin Realm martial artists. He was shocked and hastily jumped 3 times before dodging a group attack. The terrifying attack of Yuan Qi instantly created a huge gap at the edge of the mountain. However, although this group of attacks looked like a huge scene, in reality, the 74 people were just throwing out a strand of Yuan Qi. There was no gap between them at all. When Xiangnan had just dodged a group attack, a second group attack had arrived. Xiangnan poured his Yuan Qi into his legs and dodged another long distance. He narrowly escaped another fatal attack. He's probably going to retaliate. Loose attack. That tall and thin man was very strong and knew Xiangnan's situation very well. He knew that Xiangnan had no other way out than to counterattack. As a result, the 74 strands of Yuan Qi that the 74 people launched the third group attack did not condense into a large ball and accurately hit an area. Instead, All of the Yuan Qi spread out and flew towards Xiang Nan in a fan-shaped manner. Xiang Nan really intended to retaliate, but in the current situation, there was no way to charge forward. Yuan Qi was everywhere. Hide. Fortunately, the Yuan Qi was more dispersed. Xiang Nan simply raised his heavy saber and directly withstood 3 saber rays of sword light. With a loud boom, Xiang Nan was knocked back 2 to 3 meters by the impact, and his feet were already stepping on the edge of the mountain peak. Holy shit! A heaven-shaking shout came from the spectators' seats. This is a battle between 74 people against 1 person. I didn't expect to see such a wonderful performance in the first edition. All the outer sect disciples were extremely excited. They were happy to see the scene go out of control, but most of the Haran sect disciples' faces were ashen and they felt that their faces were lifeless. Damn it! Li Qingchuan looked at that scene and cursed angrily. With a strong background, would he be bullied like this? I didn't see them deal with Luo Yuan and the others like this. It was strange that Xiang Nan did not have a strong backer, so when others bullied Xiang Nan, they naturally did not have any worries about the future. I'll bully you, what can you do? Can you, a wild brat from a remote, small mountain village, take revenge on us? At first, Xiang Nan was able to dodge the attack with ease, but very quickly, the 74-man team ran into each other better and better, and their ranged attacks became even more proficient. At this moment, Xiang Nan was already struggling to dodge the group attack. As a result, an even worse scene appeared. The skinny man poured his Yuan Qi into his voice and shouted, "The other 74 people, if you don't want to be killed, come join our team. Whoever makes the greater contribution to the attack on Xiang Nan, I will leave whoever remains in the end. Otherwise, we will kill him." The other 74 martial artists on the 10th peak had originally been watching from afar in fear, but now that they heard the threat of the tall and thin man, they were so frightened that they all joined the group attacking Xiang Nan. Shouts of alarm immediately resounded from the spectators' seats throughout the clouds. The 12 joint examinations had just begun, and the first wave of climax had arrived. 148 martial artists from the 10th peak of the elimination round of the editions attacked Xiang Nan alone. Boom! The tall and thin man shook his finger at Xiang Nan, and the hateful voice tore through his heart and lungs. 148 strands of Yuan Qi poured towards Xiang Nan like a violent storm. Didn't you use a saber? Didn't you learn the shield martial skill? Go crazy again! The tall and thin man shouted ferociously. 148 strands of Yuan Qi, there were practically no dead ends. Xiang Nan couldn't dodge it at all, so he could only raise his saber horizontally and push the Yuan Qi above the saber to its peak. The terrifying saber light attached itself to the blade, and it was trembling with a buzzing sound. Immediately after, 4 sword lights struck Xiang Nan at the same time, shaking Xiang Nan backwards. Xiang Nan's left foot had already soared into the air, while his right foot fiercely stomped on the ground, using Yuan Qi to reinforce the ground, using Yuan Qi to stick his right foot to the edge of the cliff. This time, he was barely blown out of the range of the mountain peak, so close that he was almost eliminated. Taking advantage of Xiang Nan's pause, the 148 people's loose attacks immediately turned into precise attacks. 148 strands of Yuan Qi rolled into a ball and accurately rushed towards Xiang Nan. It was to take advantage of Xiang Nan's pause to completely crush him into pieces. Chapter 247 I Can't Bear It. This is too outrageous. An elder of the 7th generation of the Haran sect was so angry that his eyes turned red. What the fuck is this? Xiang Nan is the strongest person in our Haran sect. We still want to wait for him to achieve good results and win honor for our sect." The students of the first grade academy also cursed angrily. How embarrassing! How embarrassing! Before the outer sect experts could defeat Xiang Nan, they had already been dealt with by their fellow disciples. Murong Wanqing and the others were so angry that their mouths trembled. Looking at the 10th peak, it was already the 45th minute. However, Xiang Nan was unable to dodge the precise attack of the Yuan Qi swarm, because the impact of the bombardment on his body had not been completely removed. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible for him to dodge the range attack flexibly. Xiang Nan could only be forced to release a flash step on the spot and display his trump card. In the past, only the disciples of the Haran sect knew about this trump card, but now, everyone in the world would probably know about it. However, because the flash steps were too fast, they could only move in a straight line at a short distance. It was impossible for him to bypass the Yuan Qi group and charge into the enemy's circle. In this flash, he moved 500 meters horizontally. Once Xiang Nan stopped, he immediately sprinted around and tried to find a chance to counterattack. Stay in formation and follow him. This mountain peak is only 1,000 meters in diameter, and he can't create any waves no matter what. The tall and thin man commanded calmly, and the large group approached Xiang Nan in an orderly manner. This scene could be said to be unimaginable. In the audition, 148 people chased after one person, causing the audience to be stunned. Xiang Nan sprinted around the outer ring of the mountain peak, but no matter how fast he ran, he could not find a suitable opportunity to attack. After all, he was running wildly in the periphery, and the enemy troops were standing at the center of the circle. As long as they turned around, they would be able to face Xiang Nan again. Ha ha ha. Run. Continue running. The tall and thin man laughed wildly. Continue running. Give me 2 more laps to make me laugh. Xiang Nan, what the fuck are you doing? You hear me clearly. Fuck you, mother, kiss. That tall and thin man had completely lost control. As a disciple of the Haran sect, he actually used such dirty language to insult a fellow disciple in front of all the martial artists in the world. Not to mention the elders of the Haran sect, even Elder Shi Beihong's face was ashen. Everyone present was in an uproar. No, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Li Qingchuan had never been so angry before. With his sword in hand, his lungs were about to explode with anger. However, just as that tall and thin curse sounded, Xiang Nan, who was originally running wildly, stopped. Because he ran too fast and stopped too quickly, he stamped his foot and used both of his feet to arch up a pile of dirt. The pile of dirt instantly cracked and crushed rocks and mud flew out randomly. Xiang Nan held the saber and looked at the tall and thin man from afar, but surprisingly, he said in a very calm voice, "You, say it again." This voice faded into the clear water, without the slightest bit of emotion, just like the tranquility on the eve of a storm. The skinny tall man didn't show any signs of weakness as he gritted his teeth and said, "F***ck, you, are you?" Whoosh! Xiang Nan let out a long breath and suddenly lowered his head. Shit! Luo Yuan's heart skipped a beat, Xiang Nan's middle skill. That fellow intentionally angered him. With Xiang Nan's temper, he definitely rushed forward without caring about it. In this way, he will be attacked by the Yuan Qi swarm to the point that he won't even have any scrap left. But at this moment, the wind blew. A howling gale inexplicably appeared, engulfing the trees and bending over. There was a barrier on the outer edge of the arena. The mountain breeze outside couldn't blow in at all, and the sudden gust of wind was even more bizarre. "Attack! He's coming!" the skinny man shouted in surprise. As he spoke, 148 strands of yuan qi sprayed towards Xiang Nan. This was the skinny and tall tactic. First, he used his loose attacks to give Xiang Nan a huge impact. Taking advantage of the stalemate in Xiang Nan, he used it to strike with precision. However, what happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. A strong wind blew towards them, supporting Xiang Nan's body and blowing towards the crowd. Facing the storm of yuan qi, Xiang Nan's body suddenly swayed like a withered leaf in the gale. What was shocking was that Xiang Nan had actually dodged. His body was as light and free as the wind and as smooth as water. In that seemingly impermeable yuan qi shower, he glided back and forth with a ghostly movement technique. Streams of yuan qi almost passed by Xiang Nan's body, but Xiang Nan was always able to dodge it from the most perfect angle. It was impossible for him to dodge it any later or any longer. What? The tall and thin man was shocked. Seeing Xiang Nan getting closer and closer, he hurriedly shouted, "Hurry up, hurry up. All of you, use your full strength for this daddy." Everyone didn't dare not listen and hurriedly threw out their yuan qi like crazy. This time, the yuan qi attacks became even more intense. However, because their footsteps were no longer unified, the yuan qi emitted by the group had already been divided into different ranks, and they were scattered unevenly. Although the group attacks were more intense and faster, Xiang Nan had more room for maneuver. He drifted back and forth, using an incomprehensible method to bypass strands of yuan qi, avoiding danger again and again. At this moment, Xiang Nan was only 20 meters away from the crowd. What kind of damn movement technique is this? A look of fear finally appeared in his tall and thin eyes. "Hurry up and give it to me." He couldn't say the last word. Xiang Nan's body suddenly accelerated, using his fastest speed to dodge the latest attack and arrive in front of the crowd. Gale Spear Light. The tall and thin man no longer had time to command the troops. He was so scared that he stabbed the spear in his hand at Xiang Nan. The spear light was so fast that it transformed into a fan-shaped spear shadow. Xiang Nan circled around once again, forming an enormous arc and sneaking into the crowd. The tall and thin man hurriedly turned to the crowd. In such a short period of time, he was unable to accurately find Xiang Nan, so he was ruthless and directly shot the gun at the crowd. The three people in the front row were instantly pierced into a beehive by the spear light. The three of them stared at the tall and thin man with incredulous eyes and fell to the ground to die one after another. At the same time that the skinny man's attack stopped, a shadow suddenly flashed through the crowd. The shadow suddenly appeared in front of the tall and thin man, causing his pupils to shrink in fear and his heart to stop beating. It was Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan's speed was extremely fast. He quickly brushed past the tall and thin man and stretched out his left arm to wrap his left arm around the tall and thin man's neck. As Xiang Nan rushed out, the tall and thin man was pulled back by his neck, and his entire body was dragged into the air. Xiang Nan wrapped his thin and tall neck around him and said coldly, "You scold me again for what you just said." The tall and thin man's eyes were wide open, and at this moment, he suddenly felt extremely regretful in his heart. People only start to reflect on their actions when they are in a desperate situation. Whether it is worth it or not, it is usually already too late at this time. Xiang Nan suddenly bent down while running wildly and used his left arm to smash the tall and thin back shoulder heavily onto the ground. The tall and thin man raised his limbs so high that his eyeballs almost flew out of his body. Immediately after, Xiang Nan raised his saber and landed. The skinny and tall man's head spat out blood and snapped. He raised his head on the spot and was grabbed by Xiang Nan again. Chapter 248. Let him fight. Xiang Nan grabbed the skinny and tall man's sparkling head and stood there with his head lowered, allowing the blood on his head to drip onto the ground. At this moment it was as if time had stopped, and none of the spectators in the audience were boisterous. On the contrary, everyone felt an indescribable sense of refreshment from the bottom of their hearts. Fighting was a battle, but insulting someone's closest relatives was something that anyone with a bit of courage would not be able to endure. Not only was Xiang Nan unable to bear it, even the audience hated the skinny man to the extreme. Good kill. Someone suddenly stood up and shouted. Luo Yuan and the others waved their arms happily. Killing someone wasn't worth it to feel refreshed, but this time, it was an exception. The shouts of the audience alarmed the 10th Peaks team. There were still 18 Nature's sect disciples inside. At this time, it was already the 54th minute of the audition elimination round. They had already collectively offended Xiang Nan and knew that it was too late for them to apologize. They simply gritted their teeth and fought again. 147 people launched an indiscriminate bombardment on Xiang Nan. But Xiang Nan was too close to them. In a flash, he rushed into the crowd. There were many people, and they had an advantage. They had already shown it earlier, but it was also a huge disadvantage. Once Xiang Nan entered their ranks, it would be difficult for them to use it. 147 people squeezed together, completely unable to do anything to Xiang Nan. Many people even accidentally injured their teammates. Xiang Nan quickly traveled through the crowd, looking for only the disciples of the Haoran sect. As a fellow Grandmaster brother, you should be killed for being so cold-blooded. Xiang Nan grabbed the neck of a disciple of the Haoran sect and stabbed his saber in. It pierced through the disciple's back. To put a personal grudge in front of the world and lose all face of the sect, you should be killed. Xiang Nan circled behind another Haoran sect disciple and kicked him on the back. The disciple was kicked flying and was pierced through the space between his eyebrows by a long sword. Died at the hands of his teammates. The other Haoran sect disciples were scared out of their wits, so how could they care about looking for Xiang Nan and flee in all directions? But wherever Xiang Nan went, the gale would follow. The crowd was getting more and more chaotic, causing the Haoran sect disciples to keep waving their hands in the crowd and hiding from their teammates' weapons. They simply couldn't find a suitable opportunity. As for Xiang Nan, he was like a ghost, like a maggot of a tarsal bone following behind him. He walked all the way, killing all the way. One of the Haoran sect disciples had a mental breakdown. He shouted loudly, wanting to surrender. However, before Xiang Nan could utter the word, he was sliced by Xiang Nan's blade and his throat was sliced open. The Haoran sect disciple clutched his neck and spat out blood in vain. He slowly knelt down and fell to the ground with a thud. I'm not a descendant of a great aristocratic family. Xiang Nan kicked over a disciple and threw out a huge saber, killing that disciple through his heart. But if that's the case, you think you can humiliate me at will. Xiang Nan waved his hand and pulled the giant saber back with his yuan qi. He grabbed it and slashed it horizontally, cutting off the other disciple's head. Just give it a try. Xiang Nan soared into the air and slashed down from top to bottom. This saber slashed a disciple from head to toe in half. If you have any ability, just try it out. I, Xiang Nan, will take it all. Xiang Nan roared. He shook his arm crazily. The giant saber had already emitted an ear-piercing buzzing sound. With the trembling of the giant saber, a tornado suddenly appeared in the horizon, hitting the dozen or so contestants mixed with Harran sect disciples in midair. The bodies of these disciples were sliced apart by the strong wind, and countless cracks were instantly cut through their bodies. As Xiang Nan's arm abruptly stopped, the blade of the saber exploded. The gale suddenly exploded, and more than a dozen disciples were immediately shocked into a mist of blood mixed with pieces of meat. Xiang Nan's roar was directed at these contestants, as well as Jiang Qing, Hong Bin, and the others. It was already the 59th minute, but there were still more than 100 surviving disciples on the scene. "All of you, scram!" A fierce beam of sunlight landed on Xiang Nan's body with a loud boom, and then Xiang Nan stomped down on the crowd. All the remaining contestants hurriedly used their Yuan Qi shields, but Xiang Nan's kick was aimed at the mountain. The edge of the mountain was originally inclined, and the further it went, the thinner it became. As for Xiang Nan's kick with the sun god technique, it directly crushed the edge of the mountain. With this step, a huge fan-shaped incision was made at the edge of the mountain peak. The sun's power and countless debris shot out, sending the 100-plus people flying. It was impossible to kill everyone with just one kick, but it was enough to send them out of the mountain. Time's up. At this moment, Elder Shi Beihong in the sky made the final judgment. There was only one person standing on the 10th peak. More than 100 other disciples fell from the sky, mixed with gravel. The scene was completely silent. At this moment, Xiang Nan's entire body was bathed in blood. He held his head high and tightly gripped the huge saber. He shouted, "Man, I'll kill him. I've broken the rules. If you want to disqualify me or expel me from the sect, Xiang Nan will accept it. But I will not regret it." At that moment, Xiang Nan had a bloody demeanor in everyone's eyes. However, the hot blood in everyone's bones started to boil at this moment. Applause. That's how it should be. Mo Hai fiercely waved his fist and said in a deep voice, "This is the Xiang Nan I know." Even Mo Hai, who had always been calm, cursed. It could be seen how relieved his hatred was. However, the truth was that the rules clearly stated that only 75 people could be eliminated. However, Xiang Nan had killed dozens of people in a row and drove the remaining 100 or so people out of the 10th peak. The only winner of the 10th peak was Xiang Nan himself. Was this a violation of the rules? Everyone had no confidence in their hearts, but they didn't care about this. All they knew was that their hearts were incomparably straightforward. "Please come and discuss with the other 10 auxiliary judges." Elder Shi Beihong called in 10 other auxiliary judges. 11 people held a discussion there. The outcome of this discussion would directly determine whether Xiang Nan could continue to play. Xiang Nan, on the other hand, held his saber and closed his eyes. He did not care about the results anymore. Even if he was kicked out of the 12 joint examinations, he would have no regrets. Those who should be killed would not be soft-hearted, even if they tried to violate the rules. Even if he had to do it again, he would still have to kill them. "Let him fight." Someone in the spectator stands shouted. Immediately after, tens of thousands of people shouted in unison. "Let him fight. Let him fight. We want to see Xiang Nan continue fighting." Finally, the results of the discussion came out. Elder Shi Beihong pressed his hands down, signaling for everyone to calm down. "The jury has ruled that Xiang Nan did not violate the rules," he announced on the spot. As for the disciples who were chased out of the 10th peak, they decided on the elimination results in order. The 74 disciples who landed on the peak at the latest won together with Xiang Nan. Hearing this announcement, the entire arena was in an uproar. Chapter 249 team tournament. Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan. Everyone shouted Xiang Nan's name at the same time. This was the first time since the 12 joint examinations began. Xiang Nan used his own actions to prove what a man should do when facing many powerful enemies, and what a man should do when defending the honor of his family. A martial artist's anger was originally more intense than a mortal's. The blood in their bones could easily be ignited. It could be said that on this day at least, everyone's hearts were directed towards Xiang Nan. In particular, Xiang Nan had personally created a mission that was almost impossible to accomplish, and that was to fight 148 people alone and win alone in the end. If it weren't for the restrictions of the rules, the winner of the 10th peak would only be Xiang Nan himself. I'm afraid that no one will be able to break this terrifying result in the second, third, or even more joint examinations in the future. Xiang Nan's treatment was obviously unfair, but it also confirmed the old saying that current affairs make heroes. After the first round of the auditions ended, Shi Beihong announced the rules for the second round on the spot. The second segment was a team competition. Before Elder Shi Beihong announced the rules, almost everyone would think that the team competition was to plan the majority of the teams into a single competition area and then fight against each other, winning by relying on the overall strength of the team. But in the end, everyone was mistaken. The so-called team competition was not a team of 5, but a one-on-one duel. The specific rules are as follows. 750 people, divided into 10 competition areas, each with 75 people, and each team consisted of 5 people, which meant that there were a total of 15 teams in each competition area. Afterwards, the 15 teams in each competition area were divided into 3 groups, 5 teams in each group. The 3 groups took out the top 3 of the competition area in total. In the end, the 12 eliminated teams fought the resurrection battle. This resurrection battle changed the rules and became a chaotic battle. 12 teams fought together, and in the end, one team won. They met up with the top 3 teams in the competition area and advanced together. Alright, let's draw lots now to complete the team composition. Elder Shi Beihong waved his hand and an auxiliary referee immediately lifted up a huge stone slab. There were a total of 150 names written on the stone slab. Among them, Xiang Nan was on the list, and behind Xiang Nan's name was a number of 32. Apart from Xiang Nan, Hong Bin, Jiang Qing, Moron Wanqing, and the others were all on the list. Could it be Mo Hai and Li Qingchuan exchanged a glance? There were a total of 150 teams in the 10 regions, but there were 150 names on the stone slab. Elder Shi Beihong announced loudly, "The name on this stone slab is a provisional list of the top 150 judges after the first round of auditions. These 150 people will not participate in the drawing of lots, but each of their names will be followed by a corresponding number plate. When the other contestants draw the corresponding number plate, they can join the team of their counterparts." Xiang Nan and the others were asked to step out, and then the remaining 600 people lined up to draw the number plates. "I'm number 23. The first person to draw the number plate hurriedly raised the number plate and shouted loudly, and went to see the corresponding person on the stone slab. On the stone slab, number 23 corresponded to Moron Wanqing. The contestant immediately shouted in ecstasy, "Ha ha ha! Sunset and I are on the same team. Now we're rich." Moron Wanqing was expressionless. She did not care if her team members were strong or not, because she was already stimulated by Xiang Nan. She was prepared to rely on her own strength to enter the top 3. "Aha! I drew number 1. Senior brother Hong Bin and I are on the same team." Another person shouted happily, This time, it immediately attracted the envy of the other students. Being able to be assigned to the same team as Hong Bin was basically considered certain that they would be able to advance. That's right. The order of the number plates this time is the ranking of the judges based on their overall strength. Currently, Hong Bin is still the number 1 expert, and the second strongest is Zhou Xianyong. The audience couldn't understand why Xiang Nanhai had performed so well in the knockout round, but he was rated as the 32nd strongest person in the tournament. If the audience were to choose for themselves, they would most likely choose Xiang Nan as number 1. Stop shouting. In the spectator stands, a sect disciple was extremely annoyed. He roared, "Just watch the match carefully. The referee panel is chosen by 11 referees. They naturally have their own reasons. Wow! I'm number 3. I'm on the same team as senior brother Zhou Xianyong. Hahaha, this is number 2. Senior brother Jiang Cheng and I are on the same team." Every contestant participating in the drawing of lots was extremely nervous. They all hoped that they could draw the number plate at the front of the sequence number. Damn it, I drew number 136. This time, it's over. Some people were happy, while others were naturally worried. Those who drew the number plate number 100 were incomparably depressed. I drew number 32. A disciple dressed in the clothes of the Guihai sect looked at Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan and the disciple exchanged glances and nodded politely. Following that, the team drawing lots got closer and closer, and Xiang Nan's 4 teammates were also confirmed. They were Lu Cheng of Guihai sect, Gui Yuan 3rd layer, Huang Tian and Gui Yuan of the Quicksand sect, Hong Qingji and Gui Yuan 2nd layer of the Jingmen sect, as well as Yu Shaoyi of the White-Clothed sect and Gui Yuan 4th layer. After drawing lots, the contestants went to search for their own team's location. "Hello, Xiang Nan. My name is Yu Shaoyi. I'm from the White-Clothed sect." A beautiful woman stretched out her right hand towards Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan clenched her hands and smiled, "Nice to meet you." Yu Shaoyi was at the 4th level of origin return, but she was already 27 years old. It could be seen that this woman's talent was not very good. "Hello, Xiang Nan." The man from the Guihai sect walked up and shook hands with Xiang Nan, saying, "Lu Cheng, outer sect disciple of the Guihai sect, 25 years old, Gui Yuan 3rd layer." Xiang Nan then shook hands with the other 3 and introduced them to each other. Although the strength of these people weren't too outstanding, Xiang Nan felt relieved. At the very least, he didn't share them with the people of the Haoran sect anymore. This thought was actually a little ironic. "I watched your match. It was really impressive." Lu Cheng patted Xiang Nan on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, the 4 of us are your trusted teammates." "Yes, Xiang Nan, I admire your character." Yu Shaoyi also smiled like a flower and said, "Even if we risk our lives, we will fight alongside you to the end." "Thank you everyone. I hope that we can help each other and strive for a good ranking," Xiang Nan said gratefully. Chapter 250 New Enmity and Old Hatred. Alright. Everyone has found their own team. Then disband. The team competition will be held tomorrow morning. I hope that everyone will arrive on time. Elder Shi Beihong clapped his hands and the audition elimination tournament officially ended. However, it was worth noting that today, the contestants had only found their own teams, but they had not been assigned to the competition area on the spot. In other words, until now, no one knew who their enemies were. After the soul-stirring auditions and elimination rounds, the Haoran sect set up a feast for all the contestants, allowing them to eat and drink well. They should rest early and prepare for the new battle tomorrow. In order to allow the contestants to rest well, no one else was allowed to enter the Haran sect to disturb the contestants except the 750 contestants. Instead, they stayed behind and spent the night in the Haran mountain range. Otherwise, Xiang Nan, who was in the limelight, would probably be surrounded wherever he went. Congratulations, Xiang Nan. Luo Yuan was the first to come to Xiang Nan's table. He used his elbow to push against Xiang Nan and smiled, "Good performance. Damn it, I didn't expect you to be so strong. You actually defeated all the opponents of the 10th peak. Luo Yuan, don't laugh at me. I'm unlucky today." Xiang Nan shook his head. His mood was still a little low. No matter what, he had fallen out with his fellow disciples. Wow, it's Luo Yuan. I saw his audition elimination match. His strength is frightening. Xiang Nan's teammate, Huang Tian from the Quicksand sect, whispered. That's right. I heard that he is also the young master of the Luo clan in East China Sea province. I didn't expect Xiang Nan to know such an awesome person. Hong Qingji of the Spirit sect said enviously. At this time, Shen Linhai also walked over. He simply sat beside Xiang Nan and said, Xiang Nan, I know what you care about, but I want to advise you not to take it to heart. Those people who are cursed will be killed. It's not a pity. They are not worthy of being Haran sect disciples. Even if they die, they will comply with the will of the people. Lin Hai's words are correct. Murong Wanqing came over with a glass of wine from the other end and echoed. My God, it's Shen Linhai and Murong Wanqing. Xiang Nan's 4 teammates were all stunned. The reputation of the 5 aristocratic families in the East China Sea was very loud. Afterwards, Feng Zhaoqi and Jiang Yu also came back and forth, comforting Xiang Nan without exception. Thank you for your advice. Xiang Nan is very grateful. Xiang Nan raised his glass and drank with the 5. At this moment, Xiang Nan's heart was very warm. After being rejected and hostile by so many people, the 5 of them were willing to come and sit with him immediately. This was a great support in itself. Haha. Shen Linhai hugged Xiang Nan's shoulder and said affectionately, earlier, I only thought that your character was good, but I didn't have any other thoughts. However, after watching your battle today, to be honest, I have begun to admire you. A little. By the way, are these your teammates? Murong Wanqing looked at Lu Cheng, Huang Tian and the others and asked. The 4 of them stared at Murong Wanqing's beautiful appearance, but they were stunned and forgot to answer. Murong Wanqing raised her glass to the 4 of them and said, the 5 of us know best how difficult Xiang Nan's journey has been. Please cooperate with Xiang Nan and live up to his abilities. Xiang Nan looked at Murong Wanqing in astonishment. This was the first time she had said such warm words. Murong Wanqing glared at Xiang Nan and shouted, What, are you unhappy with me? Do you feel better if I scold you? Xiang Nan burst into laughter, but a warm current flowed through his heart. Sunset, we can all tell that you're interested in Xiang Nan. Luo Yuan laughed and coaxed, Why don't you and Xiang Nan form a pair? Yeah, I think so too. Jiang Yu nodded seriously, but one could tell that she was suppressing her laughter. You guys. What nonsense are you talking about? Murong Wanqing's eyes widened and her face immediately turned red. She said angrily, How can I like a wild boy like him? I hate him too late. Feng Zhaoqi nodded after a long moment of silence while holding the wine glass in his hand. Zhaoqi. Even you are joking with me. Murong Wanqing's expression became uglier and uglier, and she was about to lose her temper. All right, all right. Xiang Nan hurriedly came out to make things right and said, don't joke around like this. Sunset Sun is still a girl, so it's not good to say that. Xiang Nan did not take their jokes to heart. Whoever liked her, Murong Wanqing would not like them, right? It was already heaven's blessing that she did not hate him. After 3 rounds of drinking, Xiang Nan forgot about his unhappiness during the day and chatted with everyone. Pa! Suddenly, a large hand slammed onto the table, causing all the dishes on the table to jump up. Everyone raised their heads and saw that it was Hong Bin, Jiang Cheng, Zhou Xianyong, and the others who were drinking so much that their faces turned red. Seek trouble. Murong Wanqing's temper was so hot that she suddenly stood up. Hong Bin chuckled and said, don't worry, we're here to toast. Jiang Cheng was afraid of Murong Wanqing's background, but Hong Bin, Zhou Xianyong, Chu Yan, and the others were not afraid. Those few people actually sat down without consent. Ha ha ha. Shen Linhai rubbed his wrist and said, I advise you to be sensible and leave honestly. Otherwise? Hong Bin looked at Shen Linhai. At the side, Feng Zhaoqi had already grasped his sword hilt. Xiang Nan immediately put his hand on Feng Zhaoqi's wrist, signaling him not to make a move on this occasion, lest he be disqualified from the competition. What do you want? Xiang Nan looked at Hong Bin and asked. He also knew that Hong Bin and the others were coming for him. Hong Bin poured himself a glass of wine. He raised his glass to Xiang Nan and said, you did well today. Xiang Nan narrowed his eyes and did not answer. Hong Bin's face was filled with drunkenness as he said, you know what? Because of your performance during the day, all the other sects have criticized our second-grade academy. At this moment, the mentors of our second-grade academy are reprimanding our senior brothers of the second-grade academy in the Haran mountain range. Xiang Nan, this is all thanks to you. On behalf of all the students of the second-grade academy, thank you. Thank you. You. Hong Bin gritted the words, thank you, very hard and squeezed it out from between his teeth. Xiang Nan knew that the relationship between him and the students of the second-grade academy had completely fallen to the freezing point, and there was no possibility of dissolving it anymore. The last time he defeated Li Hai, he made the second-grade students hate him. Today's battle had killed more than a dozen second-grade students and even made the world's martial artists laugh at the second-grade academy. This grudge had already reached a point where fire and water could not be tolerated. Chapter 251 First Battle. As Hong Bin spoke, the scene was extremely quiet. Even the contestants at the next few tables didn't dare to breathe out a mouthful of air. Murong Wanqing and the others held back their anger in their hearts, only wishing that they didn't have a chance to erupt. Xiang Nan's 4 teammates were frightened. Facing a person of Hong Bin's level, the 4 of them didn't even have the courage to speak. Luo Yuan held the wine glass and suddenly laughed loudly, Hong Bin, it's really shameless of you to say those words. Do you want to try again? Jiang Cheng, Zhou Xianyong, Chu Yan, Yang Liener, and the others stood up abruptly. They all stood up with ferocious momentum. How is it? Murong Wanqing, Shen Linhai and the others also stood up together. The 2 sides stood opposite each other, each of them unyielding, as if they were ready to attack at any moment. Only Hong Bin and Luo Yuan were still sitting at the table. Luo Yuan was playing with the wine glass and said, I wonder who colluded to bully Xiang Nan together. In the end, your scheme failed and you became angry. Huh, can't you just bully others and make them stand up to resist? If it's not for your shamelessness, how could you lose so much face? The scene was filled with gunpowder. Hongbin sneered, I'm talking to Xiang Nan. What's the matter with you, Luo Yuan? Luo Yuan placed his hand on Xiang Nan's shoulder and said, Xiang Nan is my good brother. You are targeting him, you are targeting me. Beside him, Zhou Xianyong sneered, the Luo clan has been very close to the military these past few years. Their tone has really grown louder. Seeing that the two sides were getting more and more stiff, Xiang Nan stood up and said to Hongbin, Hongbin, you have finished what you should say. You have done not a single thing you should do. Didn't you come here for me, Xiang Nan? If you have the ability, just use it. You can be like a woman here and act like a man. Little bastard. Hongbin slapped the table and stood up with a slap. He pointed at Xiang Nan's nose and said, you have guts. Remember what you just said, don't you regret it? Kneel down and beg me to let you go. Xiang Nan took a step forward and almost got close to Hongbin's face, saying, come on. Hongbin nodded and said, all right, I'll see you in the examination room. You wait for me. After saying that, the group of people left. After this group of people made a fuss, everyone lost interest in drinking. Xiang Nan clapped his hands and said, everyone, rest. Prepare to have a good race tomorrow and let those bastards have a good experience. Everyone bid farewell and went back to rest. Xiang Nan's heart was filled with anger. This had been the case since the additions were eliminated. Now, he was almost unable to suppress this anger. Taking advantage of this 12-sec joint exam, he wanted to settle all his old and new enmities together. Second-grade students all started to hate him, so what? Even if the entire Haran Academy hates me, Xiang Nan, I'll stand up straight and show you. Come on, all of you. Come on. The next day, the contestants gathered early and rode the flying demonic beasts from the Haran sect to the arena. Early in the morning, the arena was filled with gongs and drums. Some wealthy people from Haotian City actually played lion dances here to help the 12 sects take the joint examination. The audience also took their seats, watching all kinds of wonderful performances. Applause continuously rang out. When the contestants flew over from the sky, the applause from the crowd reached its peak. Countless people cheered and welcomed the contestants into the arena. The peddlers selling jewelry and toys all left the arena and were taken over by the Haoran sect. The 10 gigantic peaks were still floating in the air, and the 10th peak had already been replaced by a new one because of the serious damage caused by Xiang Nan. Look, it's Xiang Nan. Wow, there's Hongbin. Look, it's Murong Wanqing. My God, she seems to be a little more beautiful today. The audience was filled with anticipation. Everyone had their own contestants. Although yesterday, Xiang Nan ignited the enthusiasm of the audience with hot blood, but the audience is like this, they never really faithful to a person, attitude changes quickly. Because judging from yesterday's performance, Hongbin's strength was undoubtedly the brightest, and the scene Xiang Nan made was the most grand. Everyone in the audience had their own supporters. Surprisingly, Murong Wanqing's approval rating was the highest. Perhaps, this shocking support rate had something to do with her being a great beauty. After Elder Shi Beihong appeared, everyone consciously stopped talking. Today was the second stage, the elimination round. It was also today that all the teams began to draw lots and choose their own regions. Perhaps it was the will of the heavens, or perhaps it was the good fortune that made people happy. Xiang Nan's team had drawn to the 10th competition area, which was also the 10th peak. This small episode aroused a heated discussion among the audience. Once again stepping onto the 10th peak, Xiang Nan's state of mind was calm. Alright, let's begin announcing the core rules of the elimination tournament. Elder Shi Beihong said loudly, the two teams are competing against each other. They will carry out a 5-round system. Those who have won 3 rounds will be counted as advancing. They will no longer be allowed to enter the next 2 rounds. If both sides have not won 2 rounds and lost, they will be allowed to enter the 5th round. In each round, each team can only send out 1 member. The names of the participants will be chosen by the teams themselves. Those with the highest number of votes will be selected. Now, let's draw lots in the division. There were a total of 15 teams on the 10th peak where Xiang Nan was. Each of the 5 teams was a group, and Xiang Nan chose the first group. According to the rules of the game, Xiang Nan's team had to fight against the other 4 teams in the first group to select the top 3. At this time, each of the 10 mountain peaks was supervised by a judge. The referee from the 10th peak raised his right hand and said, "Now, let's invite the first 2 teams out." After saying that, the other teams retreated to the edge of the mountain peak. The first team that Xiang Nan's team was about to face was led by Yi Dong. This person had always attracted Xiang Nan's attention. He hadn't expected to meet him in the first match. Just in time, I'll take this opportunity to probe him. Xiang Nan thought to himself. Yi Dong was not the first to step on the stage, but lowered his head and stood at the edge of the line. A tall and sturdy man walked onto the open space. "I'll go first." Lu Cheng was the first to ask for battle. Xiang Nan hesitated for a moment, but he didn't have the nerve to refuse. He couldn't say that you were too weak. "It would be best if I came first, right?" At this moment, the audience was extremely quiet. More than a third of the audience focused their attention on the 10th peak. This was because the 10th peak had just experienced a brilliant and intense battle yesterday. Everyone's enthusiasm for the 10th peak was still very high. All the contestants moved aside, and Lu Cheng cupped his fists and bowed to the sturdy man from the enemy team. "I'm Lu Cheng of the Guihai sect." The tall and sturdy man said, "Blazing Fire sect, Hua Meng. Please. Please." The 2 of them waved their hands and immediately began to fight. Xiang Nan was sweating profusely in his heart. He thought to himself, Lu Cheng must persevere and strive for the first victory. As a result, Lu Cheng had just taken a step forward when he suddenly cupped his fists and said, "I admit defeat." The scene was in an uproar. As if struck by lightning, Xiang Nan was stunned on the spot. Chapter 252 Shady Scene. Oh. That Hua Meng of the Blazing Fire sect had the same expression as the others, and he couldn't understand what was going on. Hua Mengqi said, "We haven't fought yet, why did you admit defeat?" Lu Cheng shook his head, "There's no need to fight. I don't recognize myself as your opponent." After saying that, Lu Cheng hurriedly left the arena. Even the referee beside him was confused, but he could only announce, "In the 10th division, the first group, Hua Meng won this battle." "Lu Cheng, what the hell are you doing?" Xiang Nan asked angrily as soon as Lu Cheng came down. However, Lu Cheng only lowered his head and did not speak. "Team Xiang Nan, the second contestant is invited," the referee announced. "I'll do it." Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and was about to walk towards the open space. But at this time, Huang Tian hurriedly grabbed Xiang Nan's arm and said, "Let me compete in this battle." "No." Xiang Nan frowned, "We've already lost 1 match. We can't lose any more. Since there is no end to the stalemate, let's just raise our hands and vote." Huang Tian also changed his normal state. He had said it well yesterday, but now it was going to be a show of hands. "Those who support me, please raise your hand." As Huang Tian spoke, he raised his right hand, followed by Lu Cheng, Hong Qingji, and Yu Xiaoyi. According to the rules of the competition, the winner of the poll may enter the competition. Under Xiang Nan's incredulous gaze, Huang Tian walked up to the empty space and bowed to Hua Meng. "I admit defeat." After saying that, Huang Tian retreated back. "What the hell is this?" Hua Meng cursed loudly. "Are you playing daddy? What kind of tricks are you guys playing? Holy shit!" The audience was filled with curses. One of the spectators couldn't bear to watch any longer. He stood up and scolded, "I'll fuck your ancestors. What's wrong with Xiang Nan? Did he dig up your ancestral graves, or did he sleep with your daughter-in-law? There's no need to target him like this. Yesterday it was like this, and today it is like this. If you don't want to compete properly, then fuck off. You'll be embarrassed here." This was too unruly. This was the Grand 12 Sect Joint Exam, the first of its kind. Even if you want to target someone and secretly do something shady, you should still cover it up a bit, right? But now, had he already reached such a blatant level? Xiang Nan was the lead in the first 12 joint examinations, which directly led to the shocking scandal of the joint examinations. Yesterday, it was only the Haran sect targeting Xiang Nan, but now, even the other outer sects are targeting Xiang Nan. Amidst the curses of countless spectators, Lu Cheng and the others just stood there without saying a word. Xiang Nan is not stupid. He has already sneered. "Say, what benefits did Hongbin give you?" "Xiang Nan, I'm sorry." Lu Cheng gritted his teeth and said, "At the beginning, I really wanted to help you, but is it worth it?" Xiang Nan asked, "Don't forget, we belong to the same team. Even if we are eliminated, the 5 of us will be eliminated together. If you do this, you will harm me. Isn't it also harmful to yourselves?" Lu Cheng summoned his courage and said, "I know the benefits of getting a good ranking, and I know how generous the rewards of being in the top 10 are, but I am even more clear that I am not capable of reaching that level. Rather than fantasizing about the rewards in the top 10, it's better to grasp the benefits in front of us. Hongbin promised us 4 last night. As long as we follow his instructions, he will give us a lot of benefits." "Yes, Xiang Nan, I'm sorry." Yu Xiaoyi of the white-clothed sect also said apologetically, "I'm already 27 years old. I really can't afford to delay. I really need the pill that Hongbin promised me. People die for wealth, birds die for food. I hope you don't blame us." As she spoke, Yu Xiaoyi raised her right hand and said, "Next, I will come on stage. Everyone, please vote." They raised their 4 hands. Yu Xiaoyi looked at Xiang Nan apologetically, walked up to the empty space, and bowed to Hua Meng. "I'm ashamed of myself, admitting defeat." With that, she turned around and walked back. The referee announced on the spot, "Xiang Nan, 3 rounds 3 losses, the first loss, remember a loss, waiting to fight against the next team." Yi Dong's team won a victory without even a single move. Xiang Nan was so angry that he almost gritted his teeth. At the next stop, the battle between Yi Dong's team and the other team had already begun. At the edge of the mountain peak, Xiang Nan and the others stood together in silence. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "If I promise, I will definitely take you through the team competition." Lu Cheng said, "So what? Even if we pass the team competition, there are still 200 people left in the arena. Your strength is very strong. You can make it to a good rank, but the 4 of us are just cannon fodder. What benefits can we get?" Xiang Nan. Lu Cheng looked at Xiang Nan seriously. "No matter how strong you are only at the 3rd level of the origin realm. You can't make it into the top 10. Why don't you lower your head and admit your mistake with Hongbin? Perhaps he can give you some benefits. It's better than nothing. Bullshit. I'm not as shameless as you are. Xiang Nan cursed angrily. What qualifications do you have to participate in the 12 sex joint examination? You don't even have the courage to fight. What face do you have to call yourselves martial artists? Xiang Nan said angrily, so what if you can't win? Are you giving up? Do you really not even have the slightest bit of backbone? Lu Qing sighed, whatever you say. At this point in time, Xiang Nan was speechless. He turned his head and looked at the first peak from afar. The 10 peaks were arranged in a circular pattern. The first peak was adjacent to the 9th and 8th peaks, and was facing the first peak. At this moment, at the edge of the first peak, Hongbin was hugging his shoulders and sneered at Xiang Nan. He even made a goodbye gesture to Xiang Nan. Next, Xiang Nan made a shocking move. He poured his yuan qi into his voice and shouted at Hongbin, who was at the first peak, Hongbin. If it's a man, fight me openly. Don't play such shameful tricks. Xiang Nan's voice attracted everyone's attention. No one had expected that Xiang Nan would actually put such words on the surface. How could Hongbin admit it? He just shrugged his shoulders and said, if you want to fight me, come find me based on your ability. As for what you said about shameful methods, I don't understand. Seeing such a scene, the audience was in an uproar again. Each audience member had their own thoughts, and they didn't know what they were thinking. As for the higher-ups of the Haoran sect, would they just allow this situation to continue and just sit idly by? A large crowd of spectators had already begun to shout, calling on the Nature sect to change the rules of the competition. However, the final outcome of the discussion between the Haoran sect and the other 11 sects was to maintain the original rules and continue the competition. Chapter 253 Last Chance. The explanation given by Elder Shi Beihong was that the battles between the other 9 peaks had already begun, and some teams had even won the first round. It is inevitable that there are loopholes in the rules of the first 12 joint examinations, and corresponding amendments will be made at the next session. But this time, the entire 12 joint examinations would not change the rules of the competition for Xiang Nan alone, otherwise it would be unfair to others. Xiang Nan was unwilling and shouted at Elder Shi Beihong, my request is not high. I just want to change the voting rules for the exit. Elder Shi Beihong shook his head. If you don't vote, who will fight? If you want to go on stage, he wants to go on stage as well. Could it be that everyone rushes up to fight together? Could it be that within a team, one person had to kill 4 of his teammates before he could obtain the qualifications to fight? Very quickly, it was Xiang Nan's turn to play for the second time. As the losing team, Xiang Nan was going to play against the other team that Bai Yidong had just given to Yidong. The 2 defeated teams stood together. The team that lost to Yidong was very happy. Ha ha ha, hurry up, I can't wait any longer. Who's going to admit defeat with me? The other losing team laughed out loud. Since the villain had already done it, Lu Qing did not mind doing it. He was the first to step on the stage and cupped his fists at his opponent, saying, I admit defeat. The contestant from the enemy team laughed even more heaven-shaking, fine. You won in less than a single move. Come, who's the second to fight? Quickly admit defeat with me. As Huang Tian walked up, Xiang Nan grabbed him and said coldly, can you really endure such a scene when the enemy team is shouting? If you can even endure this, then you can even eat shit. Huang Tian shook off Xiang Nan's arm and walked forward. He cupped his fists at the opponent and said, I admit defeat. Ha! Ha 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 ha. Xiang Nan looked up and smiled, smiling so helplessly and desolately. Murong Wanqing and the others looked at Xiang Nan from afar, their hearts filled with unspeakable sadness. Afterwards, Xiang Nan's team once again welcomed the third and fourth matches, but without exception, they all surrendered without a fight. In the end, the referee announced, in the first group of the 10th peak, the final 3 teams will be Yidong, and the remaining 4 teams will be eliminated. After hearing this news, Li Qingchuan had already loudly cursed his mother. It was just that the rules were like this, and there was no way to recover. As for the third battle and the fourth race, Xiang Nan hadn't said a word since he was eliminated. He just stood there quietly. The referee couldn't bear it anymore and whispered to Xiang Nan, "Don't give up. In the end, there will be a resurrection battle." On the first day of the elimination tournament, the first group of each of the 10 divisions had fought 20 battles. "Let's go, Xiang Nan, find him." As soon as Luo Yuan, Li Qingchuan and the others returned to the Haran sect, they rushed over and pulled Xiang Nan to look for Hong Bin. Luo Yuan gritted his teeth and said, "Hong Bin, that bastard. I must pull out his dog teeth today. Do you want to fight?" Murong Wanqing asked Xiang Nan a simple question. "If you want to say fight, let's do it now. Fight them to the end," she said. Xiang Nan looked at everyone gratefully, but shook his head and said, "I can't do anything. I can't even drag you into losing the rules of the game." "Fuck the rules of the game." Li Qingchuan's eyes reddened as he roared, "I don't want to participate in this kind of dog day competition anymore. I'll just do nothing and make a big fuss. Fuck them." Murong Wanqing, Shenlin Hai, and the others all looked at Xiang Nan. Although they did not speak again, their actions had already been expressed. Feng Xiaoqi held the sword and put his thumb on the scabbard, saying, "Be ready to attack at any time. Right, kill those 4 bastards who surrendered first." Luo Yuan spread out his palm, his yuan qi buzzing. Xiang Nan took a deep breath and said, "If the price of venting is that you are disqualified, then I will definitely not do such a thing. None of you need to persuade me. I've already decided." Everyone already understood Xiang Nan's temper. He was an unafraid person. If he wanted to attack, no one could stop him. If he didn't want to attack, no one could persuade him. You don't have to be angry. There's still the resurrection tournament. Xiang Nan patted Luo Yuan on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I won't be eliminated. See you in the arena." "All right." Murong Wanqing nodded, "No, you said it. See you in the arena, you said it too. If you don't make it to the arena, I'll chop off your left hand." After everyone separated, Li Qingchuan asked Mo Hai, "When did Xiang Nan become so fearful?" Mo Hai smiled, "Xiang Nan thinks too much of brotherhood. You still don't know Xiang Nan. If it weren't for the fear of implicating us, he would have already picked out Hong Bin and the others' roofs with his bullshit temper. Don't worry, I have confidence in Xiang Nan. He will come back from the resurrection tournament." The next day, Xiang Nan, who was the eliminated team, sat in the spectator stands openly. Today was the second day of the elimination tournament, and the second group of the 10 regions officially started the battle. Xiang Nan had carefully observed it. Almost every true expert didn't show their full strength. Everyone was hiding their trump cards. They wouldn't make a move unless they reached the arena. In the first round of the auditions, 750 people had been eliminated, and half of the week had already been eliminated. In the second round of the knockout round, 750 people would be eliminated, and a total of 550 people would be eliminated. In the end, the 200 people who participated in the arena contest were the martial arts masters that had been chosen by thousands and thousands of competitors, and their gold content was extremely high. On the third day, the third group and 20 matches were all over. At this point, the top 3 teams in each region had already been born. There were a total of 150 people in the 30 teams, and they had obtained the qualifications to compete in the arena ahead of time. Among them, Murong Wanqing's group of 5, Hong Bin, Jiang Qingzhou, Xian Yong, and the others were eliminated on May 1st, while Mo Hai and Li Qingchuan were also included in the competition list. Finally, it was the 4th day of the team competition. On this day, the mood of the spectators was unprecedentedly high. This time, the attention of nearly 100,000 spectators was focused on one person, and that person was Xiang Nan. The reason for that was because Xiang Nan's team was the most unique elimination team. Everyone was sweating in their hearts for Xiang Nan. Whether he could resurrect successfully or not. If nothing unexpected happened, Xiang Nan's 4 teammates would definitely not contribute. In other words, Xiang Nan would have to face the other 11 elimination teams alone in the 10th division. 12 squadrons and 5 mixed battles. Only one team could be revived. Once again, he fought alone against all the heroes. This was not the first time this had happened. Moreover, this time, it was different from the elimination round of the audition. The strength of the enemies Xiang Nan faced this time was much higher than the audition. Chapter 254 Seek Help. All the defeated teams stepped onto the 10 floating mountains, preparing for the final team resurrection. This time, 10 teams will be revived from the 10 regions, and they will join the other 30 teams to enter the 3rd stage of the arena competition. This was Xiang Nan's last chance, and it was also the match with the highest expectation of the audience. Xiang Nan, who had performed well in the auditions, did not play a single match in the group eliminations, which made the audience feel very regretful. Alright, now, let's announce the core rules of the team resurrection competition. Elder Shi Beihong floated in the sky and said loudly, 12 elimination teams are fighting in a chaotic battle in each competition area. All the members of the 12 teams go up together until the last team is left. There is no time limit. At the same time, the surrender system is as follows: the surrender of 5 contestants from each team is considered a success. If there is one more person who is prepared to continue fighting, then the match will continue. If one or more people die or lose their ability to move and speak, the remaining free agents surrender as a group and are counted as successful surrenders. Upon hearing this rule, the audience clapped their hands and applauded. In this way, no one could stop Xiang Nan from fighting. Now, please separate the 12 teams and enter the countdown phase. 10, 9, 8, 7 shouted the referees from the 10 divisions at the same time. On the 10th peak, the 12th and 5th divisions immediately began to search for the best position to prepare for the chaotic battle that was about to begin. Xiang Nan no longer had any hope for Lu Cheng and the others. He only wanted to go all out and fight a great battle. Even if he lost in the end, he would not regret it. When the referees counted down to 1, all the teams in the 10 regions immediately moved. Come on, Xiang Nan. Mo Hai sat in the spectator stands, clenching his fists tightly, sweating profusely for Xiang Nan. Come on, Xiang Nan. Luo Yuan and the others shouted loudly. The teams from the 9 peaks had already begun to test each other out, and the battle had already begun to heat up. However, the situation on the 10th peak was very different. The 11 teams actually formed a tacit understanding with each other. They did not attack each other at all, but walked towards Xiang Nan together. Holy shit! Are you done yet? Li Qingchuan cursed loudly. Are they going to fight together? Just like in the elimination round of the audition, they planned to work together to kill Xiang Nan. The audience also felt extremely angry, and the mountain shouts and tsunami-like curses immediately turned the sky upside down. Xiang Nan's heart sank when he saw the 11 teams approaching him, but the huge saber in his hand did not show any signs of relaxation. Come on! If you want to go together, then go together. I will fight you to the end. The first person in the front row of the large team suddenly spoke to Xiang Nan and said, "In the team competition, you didn't even get a chance to appear. We all express our sympathy and regret for this." Everyone else nodded. Xiang Nan was stunned. From the looks of it, they didn't seem to have any intention of attacking him collectively. That person continued, "I am a disciple of the Guihai sect, Zhang Yi. As a member of the Guihai sect, I feel ashamed and angry at Lu Cheng's actions. I'm from the Quicksand sect." Another person stepped forward and said, "This sect Huang Tian's actions have already touched the bottom line of our Quicksand sect, causing all martial artists in the world to be shameless." "I'm from the Essence sect," another person stepped forward and reported to the door. After everyone announced themselves, Zhang Yi, the disciple of the Sea Returning sect, who had spoken the first time, said to Xiang Nan, "Today, our 11 teams are not here to collectively target you, but to clean up the door." As soon as he finished speaking, the 11 teams raised their weapons and shouted angrily. This sudden change caught Xiang Nan off guard. The audience applauded the most enthusiastic applause ever, much more than when Xiang Nan had defeated 148 people by himself. It could be seen that the actions of Lu Cheng and the others had already offended the crowd. "We have already obtained the permission of our sect elder to clean up the door today, so please step aside now. What happens next has nothing to do with you," Zhang Yi said. When Lu Cheng, Huang Tian, and the others heard this, they were already terrified to the point of being utterly devastated. I surrender, we admit defeat." Lu Cheng and the others hurriedly shouted loudly. "Lu Cheng." Zhang Yi stared at Lu Cheng, killing intent flashing in his eyes. "Until now, are you still the best at surrendering?" But unfortunately, in a mixed battle, 5 people must surrender at the same time to count. This time, you won't be able to fulfill your wish. "Xiang Nan, please step aside." Xiang Nan glanced at Lu Cheng and the others and saw the pleading look in their eyes. He said, "When I asked you to fight alongside me, it was the 4 of you who abandoned me. Then now, you don't have the qualifications to seek my help." After saying that, Xiang Nan walked to the side with the huge saber in his hand. "Xiang Nan!" Lu Cheng hysterically screamed, "I beg you, surrender, please surrender." Xiang Nan shook his head. "It's impossible for me to surrender. Shameful." Zhang Yi was furious and rushed forward with a single step. "Today, I will clean up the sect and get rid of you, you coward." Zhang Yi was the first to charge forward. Immediately after, all the disciples belonging to the 4 sects of the 11 teams also attacked together. Originally, the remaining disciples did not belong to one of the 4 embarrassing sects, but they had long since lost their patience and were actually participating together. Lu Cheng and the other 4 were immediately drowned by the crowd. For a moment, his fists, feet, sabers, and swords greeted Lu Cheng and the others like a shower. Even if these 4 people had some strength, how could they withstand the siege of 55 experts? Watching this scene, the audience repeatedly shouted for relief. "Xiang Nan, save us!" Lu Cheng was beaten to the point that his body was covered in bruises. He was lying on the ground and breathing, shamelessly seeking Xiang Nan's help. Xiang Nan only quietly looked at Lu Cheng and said, "If I had known earlier, why would I have done it back then?" Zhang Yi raised his leg and kicked Lu Cheng into the air. Then, another person jumped over and stabbed Lu Cheng's chest from top to bottom with his heart-piercing leg. In an instant, Lu Cheng's 6 ribs were all broken. He let out a miserable howl and was blasted to the ground. Only now did Huang Tian and the others finally rise to resist, but the more intense their resistance was, the more viciously they were beaten up. The crowd didn't kill the 4 of them immediately. Instead, they wanted to heave a sigh of relief and beat them half to death. When the other 9 peaks had all been eliminated, and some teams had been eliminated in the resurrection match, only the 9th peak, the scene of a group fight, was still going on. The brawl lasted for an unprecedented amount of time. It lasted for a full 5 minutes, but there was still no sign of stopping. In the end, 10 minutes later, Lu Cheng and the others were already beaten to the point that they couldn't move on the ground, and they didn't even have the strength to breathe. At this time, Zhang Yi raised his saber and said to Lu Cheng, "Sect scum, go die." Buzz! Just as Zhang Yi's saber descended and was about to cut off Lu Cheng's head, a huge saber suddenly pierced into his body horizontally, stopping Zhang Yi's saber. Everyone turned their heads in surprise. Xiang Nan was holding a huge saber in his hand as he looked at the crowd indifferently. Chapter 255 Chaotic Battle. Xiang Nan. You! Zhang Yi frowned and shouted, "What, have you forgotten how these 4 people treated you? Do you still want to protect them? Kill them! Kill them!" The entire audience shouted in unison, demanding that Lu Cheng's 4 people be executed on the spot. Lu Cheng lay on the ground and raised his head weakly. When he saw Xiang Nan block a fatal blow for him, tears suddenly appeared in his eyes. In the team competition, when all the spectators supported Xiang Nan, the 4 of them were thick-skinned and ignorant of anyone's obstruction. They also wanted to trap Xiang Nan together so that Xiang Nan would not be able to go on stage. At this moment, when everyone was shouting to kill Lu Cheng and the other 4, only Xiang Nan, who had been tricked by them, stood up and protected the lives of the 4 of them. Xiang Nan's right hand trembled as he pushed Zhang Yi's saber away. "The 4 of them can be ruthless, but I can't be ruthless. At least for now, they are still my teammates," he said. "Xiang Nan, what the hell are you thinking?" Zhang Yi said angrily. "Protecting them like this won't move us. Instead, it will make us look down on you." Xiang Nan said calmly, "I have never thought of touching anyone. You all want to teach the 4 of them a lesson. I've already let you teach them a lesson, but they can't die from sin. Zhang Yi, we can't ask everyone to be as fearless as we are. Perhaps you and I can put our lives aside and fight with our lives, but we can't ask others to do the same. The 4 of them just don't dare to fight, but they don't have any malicious intentions to harm anyone. This is a sin that won't lead to death. There are many people in this world who are not afraid of death, but that doesn't mean that those who are afraid of death have no right to live." Hearing this, Zhang Yi and the others were stunned, and the shouts of the audience stopped. Ask yourself, how many people are really not afraid of death? Lu Cheng and the others were only threatened and lured by Hong Bin, so scared that they didn't dare to step out. Did they have to be killed like this? There are many timid people in the world, so they should all die. Cowardice is hateful, but cowardice is innocent. This is an internal matter of our sect. Zhang Yi gritted his teeth and said, "You are a disciple of the Haoran sect. You have no right to interfere in the internal affairs of our sect." Xiang Nan nodded. "After they return, what your own sect wants to do with them has nothing to do with me, but they are still my teammates here." With that, Xiang Nan's saber trembled downwards, and a wave of air blew Lu Cheng and the others out, blowing them behind him. Xiang Nan, thank you. Lu Cheng's eyes reddened as he choked up. Xiang Nan tilted his head slightly and said to the 4 people behind him, I did not forgive you. I only do things according to my own conscience. Whoosh! Zhang Yi heaved a long sigh of relief and cupped his fists at Xiang Nan. Alright, I'm convinced. After the battle ends, we will bring back the scum of our sect. Here, we will give you face and not kill them. Xiang Nan's personal actions caused the 4 people to not be killed on the spot, which made the audience feel very uncomfortable. But at the same time, the heroes of the world also sincerely admired Xiang Nan's courage. You are a real man, I admire you. But next time, we will not show mercy to you for this matter. Zhang Yi raised his saber high and laughed at Xiang Nan loudly. Xiang Nan's huge saber stood in front of him and said, it should be like this. Divide. Zhang Yi roared, and the 11 teams separated again. They did not choose to attack Xiang Nan in groups. Battle. Another shout rang out, and the 12th and 5th squadrons immediately began their final struggle. The other teams all picked the nearest team to fight, while Zhang Yi led his own team and directly rushed towards Xiang Nan. Zhang Yi held a long saber in his hand. The saber was about 2 meters long and 4 fingers wide. As for Xiang Nan, he held a huge saber in his hand. The saber was about 3 meters long and half a meter wide. The 2 blades collided in the air. As an expert at the 4th level of origin return, Zhang Yi felt an endless amount of power pouring into his body when Xiang Nan fought. In just one exchange, Zhang Yi was sent flying by Xiang Nan's saber. The other 4 teammates rushed forward and surrounded Xiang Nan from 4 directions. Xiang Nan quickly retreated with the huge saber in his hand and slowly floated into the forest. Zhang Yi stood up from afar and felt the blood in his body surge. He forcefully suppressed the urge to vomit blood and shouted, "Chase!" The 5 of them also entered the forest. On the open space outside, the other 10 teams were fighting fiercely, their swords clashing with each other, their spears and axes intertwined. The fierce battles started quickly under the attention of the spectators. These martial artists each displayed their own ability to watch the game, causing everyone who watched the match to be greatly enlightened. In the end, there were only 6 of the 10 teams left, and these 6 teams were not satisfied with their members, but each team still had one of the strongest people standing. The 6 of them looked at each other. After a while, they said together, "Let's deal with Xiang Nan first." They were very smart. Their strengths were equal, but if they continued to fight, leaving behind the last person to fight against Xiang Nan, the result would naturally be self-evident. After saying that, the 6 of them turned into 6 shadows and rushed into the forest. The audience widened their eyes and observed the situation in the forest carefully. In the forest, 4 of Zhang Yi's teammates had already fallen down with serious injuries, losing their combat ability. On Zhang Yi's own chest, there was also a bone-deep knife wound. Zhang Yi panted heavily and couldn't believe that with his strength at the 4th level of origin return, he couldn't do anything to Xiang Nan, who was at the 3rd level of origin return. How did this fellow cultivate? Who? Where is he? The other 6 people rushed over and asked. "I'll find him." A burly man took large strides forward, raised his right hand, and fiercely punched at the ground. This punch immediately blew out a circular wave of air, blowing a large area of trees to the waist. A woman with a light stature jumped high into the air. She pulled her hands together and used her yuan qi to create a longbow. The yuan qi arrow had already been strung onto the bowstring. In the gale, Xiang Nan, who was hiding on a tree, was discovered by the woman. Over there. The corners of the woman's mouth curled into a smile. At the same time, the bowstring she had pulled loosened with a buzzing sound. The Yuan Qi arrow that came out of the bowstring turned into a beam of light and accurately shot towards Xiang Nan's location. Ha ha ha, Xiang Nan, let's see where you're hiding. The burly man laughed and ran forward like a land war chariot, his aura ferocious. He actually didn't dodge or dodge, directly running towards Xiang Nan's location, completely ignoring the trees on the path, forcefully using his body to break all the trees on the spot. Nothing could stop him. On the other side, Xiang Nan faced the rapidly flying Yuan Qi arrows and slashed down with his saber. However, the moment the giant saber landed on the Yuan Qi arrow, he felt that the situation was not good. That was because the Yuan Qi arrow was not strong, but soft. After the arrow was struck by the giant saber, it suddenly bent and turned into a long chain of origin energy. The light cord instantly wrapped around Xiang Nan's saber and right arm. Soft arrow? The audience exclaimed in unison. Chapter 256 Approach Victory. Xiang Nan didn't expect this move. He didn't know that the woman's Yuan Qi arrow had such a strange effect. But then, the strong man rushed up and roared, "Mountain cutting axe." He said it was the mountain piercing axe, but he didn't use any weapons. Instead, he used a very simple move, Tai Shan, to lean against Xiang Nan. However, the half of his body that was used to collide with Xiang Nan was instantly covered with a layer of metallic luster, and there was an arc-shaped Yuan Qi light shield on his shoulder. Xiang Nan's arm was entangled with the giant saber. If he were to break through the Yuan Qi arrow, he would lose the opportunity to resist the strong man. He could only lower his right arm and let the giant saber and sword face upwards. He used the blade to carry the strong man's blow. The terrifying impact sent Xiang Nan flying backwards, leaving a deep pit 3 meters in diameter on the ground. One had to know that the collision was a huge blade that had used its shoulder to hit Xiang Nan, and it did not come into contact with the ground. The huge crater on the ground was only a mass of air scattered by the collision force. Xiang Nan flipped backwards in midair. The moment he landed, another black shadow suddenly circled around him. The shadow was a skinny man. He held 2 daggers in his hands, and the moment he landed on the ground, his body suddenly exploded, accurately pressing towards Xiang Nan's back. Xiang Nan quickly shook his body and dodged, allowing the thin man's dagger to brush past his waist. Whoosh! There was a sound of air breaking in the sky. The woman who jumped into the air once again shot out a second arrow. Xiang Nan held the saber in his back and used the blade to cut the Yuan Qi light rope around his arm. Then, he took a step forward and stepped aside the arrow coming towards him. This time, he would not be stupid enough to fight against the arrow head-on. However, the voices of the spectators did not diminish. What Xiang Nan did not notice was that even though the Yuan Qi arrow had dodged, it had actually turned around behind Xiang Nan. He returned and turned into a light cord that wrapped around Xiang Nan's legs. Ha! Xiang Nan frowned. Zhang Yi had already descended from midair, and the long saber slashed towards Xiang Nan's head, shouting, "Heaven-breaking slash." The sturdy man ran over from the side and leaned against another iron mountain, while the skinny man surrounded him from the other side. Xiang Nan could already tell that the most troublesome thing was the woman who shot the arrow. If he didn't get rid of her first, he would be extremely troubled. However, there were still 3 other experts who had been guarding the woman's side, not leaving a single inch behind. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and stabbed his saber down from between his legs. Immediately after, a green dragon went out to sea and pointed at the sturdy man. After the giant saber pierced into the ground, the blade moved backwards. When he rushed out, the blade naturally cut through the light cords that wrapped around his legs. With a loud explosion, Xiang Nan collided head-on with the strong man who was leaning against the iron mountain. That strong man was also an expert at the 4th level of the Origin Realm, but this time, he was knocked over by Xiang Nan. What martial skill is so domineering? The spectators who had never seen the Azure Dragon go out to sea widened their eyes. The incomparably strong man actually lost to the much weaker Xiang Nan in the face of a frontal charge. When Xiang Nan succeeded, he immediately drew his saber and chopped down. The drawing saber slashed towards Tsang Yi in the sky. The heaven-breaking slash of Tsang Yi landed, and even the man and the saber were slashed away by the drawing saber slash. Pooh! Tsang Yi's injuries were aggravated, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood, unable to stand up. As for the skinny man who had surrounded him from the side, because Xiang Nan's Azure Dragon had left the sea, he could only change his route and attack Xiang Nan again. When Xiang Nan landed, he saw a berserk dragon swinging its tail. This circular blade light was extremely powerful, and it looked like the skinny man was about to be hit. Whoosh! A beam of light struck the skinny man on time, but it turned into a light cord that dragged the skinny man backwards, narrowly avoiding Xiang Nan's attack. The sturdy man had rushed up again. He soared into the air, clasped his fists together, and fiercely bombarded Xiang Nan. The surface of the 2 large fists were condensed into a heavy hammer with yuan qi. The light hammer was 5 meters long and the hammer head was 3 meters tall. If this hammer went down, it would be 10 times more powerful than Iron Mountain. It was definitely the trump card of a strong man. Everyone thought that Xiang Nan would definitely retreat. Unexpectedly, a narrow beam of sunlight poured into Xiang Nan's left hand on a single finger. Sun Divine Art. Most of the audience recognized this move. When Xiang Nan was pushing the mountain rock examination, he had used the Azure Dragon to go out to sea, but he didn't use a knife, so no one could recognize him. However, they had seen the Sun God technique before. Could it be that he wants to resist? Someone cried out. Sure enough, Xiang Nan didn't dodge or dodge. He poured the power of the sun into the giant saber and rushed towards the burly man's shocking hammer of light. The strong man's hammer descended from the sky, while Xiang Nan's hammer descended from the sky. From the bottom up, he had a huge advantage in terms of position. Especially since the 2 of them were still fighting head-on, almost no one was optimistic about Xiang Nan. However, when the giant saber and the light hammer collided, the burly man's light hammer was instantly sent flying. The huge light hammer buzzed as it flew into the air. The sturdy man's eyes revealed an expression of disbelief, but he was struck by Xiang Nan's next heavy saber on his chest. The burly man was smashed to the ground, and his body bounced high again. Xiang Nan landed on the ground and directly kicked the burly man in the heart. The strong man coughed out a mouthful of blood and fainted on the spot. The skinny man turned into an afterimage. The tip of the dagger had already pressed against Xiang Nan's back and was about to pierce through his body. However, Xiang Nan's body suddenly flashed and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind the skinny man. Xiang Nan lightly knocked the skinny man on the back of the head with the hilt of his knife, and he fainted with a roll of his eyes. Xiang Nan's shadow steps were their nemesis when dealing with this kind of speed-type martial artist. The audience applauded. There are still 4 people left. Xiang Nan raised his head and looked at the woman in the air. The woman stepped on a long strand of yuan qi. The bottom of the strand landed on the ground, while the top supported her right foot, allowing her to remain high above the ground. And the ones protecting her were 3 martial artists who were also using swords. These 3 were well proportioned, and their auras were restrained. They looked like experts using swords at a glance. Xiang Nan looked at the woman and sprinted forward. The woman held the bow in her left hand and drew the bowstring with her right hand. 3 yuan qi arrows were already mounted on it. Xiang Nan took a flash step and disappeared, appearing behind the woman. However, the woman's 3 arrows also shot out, but only the one in the middle flew forward, and the other 2 actually strangely circled back. Before Xiang Nan could make a move, 2 arrows of yuan qi had already tied him and the woman together. The corner of the woman's mouth rose slightly. Do you want to use the same move twice? The woman was very clever. She had already expected Xiang Nan to use that kind of fast and frightening movement technique. Chapter 257 Born from Martial Arts. The other 3 sword Dao experts attacked at the same time. The woman took a step forward, but she pierced through her own yuan qi arrows and walked out easily. The remaining 2 yuan qi arrows quickly shrank, binding Xiang Nan's arms and legs. I was fooled. The woman chuckled. Body Tyrant Lightning Drive. Xiang Nan used the Tyrant Body Lightning Drive in an instant, relying on unparalleled power to break the 2 yuan qi arrows that wrapped around him into pieces. How did you break it? The woman was shocked. The moment Xiang Nan broke free, he disbanded the Tyrant Body Lightning. Southern Mountain Snow Lotus. A sword Dao expert had arrived. He stretched out his left hand horizontally, his palm raised, and a pure white yuan qi lotus floated towards Xiang Nan. Immediately after, this person held a sword in his right hand and slashed down on the yuan qi lotus. The lotus immediately collapsed and turned into hundreds of dense, small swords that shot towards Xiang Nan in a fan shape. Raptors swing their tails. Xiang Nan swept the huge saber in his hand, and a circular saber light spread out, sending countless small swords flying. The second sword Dao expert had already circled behind Xiang Nan. The sword in his hand threw out a 5-meter-long sword light, but the sword light did not fly out. Instead, it adhered to the sword body like a light whip. Pa! Xiang Nan suddenly bent over and dodged. The light whip let out a crisp whip sound above his back. Immediately after, the man waved his sword and the light whip turned into dense shadows that wrapped around Xiang Nan. Wandering dragon riding waves. Xiang Nan lowered his head abruptly, and a violent gust of wind rose. He used an inconceivable movement technique to shuttle back and forth in the dense light and shadows, and swayed his body to bully the expert of the sword Dao. The giant sword slashed backwards, forcing the third sword Dao expert to retreat. At the same time, a palm of his left hand was imprinted on the chest of the martial artist who swung the whip. Under this palm, there was a dense layer of lightning wrapping around the palm. Pang! The whip-swinging expert vomited blood and flew backwards. This palm strike that contained the power of thunder and lightning was extremely powerful, directly knocking the expert unconscious. Whoosh whoosh! 3 air-piercing sounds rang out as 3 yuan qi arrows flew over. Xiang Nan had already seen through the attributes of her arrows. This time, she did not dodge, or fight head-on. Instead, she stretched out her left hand and pinched all 3 arrows in her hand. Southern Mountain Snow Lotus. A gigantic snow lotus 3 meters in diameter appeared above the head of the first sword Dao expert. The snow lotus descended vertically and pierced through his body. At the height of his waist, the snow lotus suddenly collapsed. Thousands of small swords flew towards Xiang Nan like a storm. This time, there were far too many small swords, 10 times as many as the first one. The area covered had also tripled. Xiang Nan couldn't dodge such a dense attack, unless he used a flash step to flee backwards. That way, he would be able to increase the distance between him and the woman. Xiang Nan simply refined qi into electricity. Lightning wrapped around his hands, crushing 3 yuan qi arrows before quickly forming seals with his hands. The speed at which he formed the seal was already brightening. His 2 hands transformed into 2 shadows and collided with each other at high speed. Immediately after, he spat out a mouthful of yuan qi towards the formed hand seal. The yuan qi passed through the palm print and immediately transformed into a huge ball of lightning. Back when Xiang Nan was still at the Xiantian realm, the lightning he blew was only the size of an apple when he was about to leave his mouth. After walking for a while, he laughed loudly for the watermelon and grew larger as the distance increased. But now that he was at the 3rd level of origin return, the power of refining qi into lightning had increased by countless times. This mouthful of lightning shot out, and the ball of lightning was nearly 3 meters in diameter from its mouth. After flying, it quickly spread to a diameter of 6 meters. The ball of lightning that rolled forward immediately crushed a path through the thousands of small swords. Although those small swords seemed to be very powerful, they were actually split into thousands of pieces, and their power was equally spread out. "What is this?" the sword Dao expert's pupils contracted, and before he could say the last word, "mo," he was engulfed by a gigantic bolt of lightning that was 12 meters long. "Not good, not good." The woman hurriedly pulled back the bowstring. Xiang Nan pointed in the direction of the woman and quickly formed a seal with both of his hands. Then, his left fingers slid down. Pa! A bolt of lightning struck the woman. Her body instantly froze and she was blasted to the ground. Xiang Nan was not idle. When he released the lightning bolt, he had already chased after him. He knocked his knee and pressed it against the stomach of the sword Dao expert who was stuck in a stalemate by How lightning. The expert bowed in disgust and was smashed on the back of his neck by the sword hilt. His eyes darkened and he fainted. Xiang Nan turned around and saw that there was still the last sword Dao martial artist. The martial artist hurriedly smiled bitterly and waved his hand. All right, I admit defeat. I am not your opponent. It is truly too scary." At this time, the referee of the 10th peak raised his right hand and said, "The 10th peak, the winner of the resurrection competition, the Xiang Nan team." No applause, no cheers. The audience was dumbfounded and stunned. Xiang Nan used a combat style comparable to a textbook, telling everyone what to do when fighting more with less. In this battle, there weren't any earth-shattering martial skills. However, the so-called amateurs were lively and experienced. The amateurs only liked to watch the big scenes, but all the spectators were martial artists. Only they understood how well Xiang Nan had used every attack and every counterattack. There were no flaws, no loopholes at all. Perfect. If Xiang Nan used an earth-shattering and terrifying martial skill to directly knock down all the enemies, everyone would only be shocked by Xiang Nan's strength. However, it was precisely Xiang Nan's brilliant fighting style that was the most important time to consider a martial artist's combat skills. After a short period of silence, the audience applauded warmly. "This is the match I want to watch," someone shouted excitedly. "Damn!" Someone cried out in alarm, "How many years of combat experience do I need to accumulate before I can reach the level of Xiang Nan?" The other sects had already obtained the qualifications to compete in the arena, and the experts sitting in the spectator stands were all feeling heavy-hearted. An Azure Cloud sect expert nodded silently. It seems that Xiang Nan has more than just a frightening talent. This battle has allowed us to understand his true strength. He was simply born for martial arts. He was simply born for martial arts. This sentence entered Mu Sweki's ears. How familiar was this sentence to her? Once upon a time, this kind of evaluation had been used on another man who was similarly glorious, but that man had already disappeared without a trace. Mu Sweki looked at Xiang Nan, who was being applauded by countless people on the battlefield, and her eyes suddenly shook. For a moment, in Mu Sweki's eyes, Bai Mukan and Xiang Nan's shadows inexplicably fused together. Chapter 258 Bid Farewell. After Xiang Nan's 10th peak ended the battle, the other 9 peaks also completed the resurrection race. A total of 10 teams from the 10 regions were successfully revived, advancing to the 3rd stage, the single-player arena competition. After Elder Shi Beihong finished his closing speech today, the elimination match was officially over amidst the enthusiastic applause of the audience. The arena competition would be held in a day, and the 200 participants would rest for a day. It was night. Those who knew Xiang Nan, but those who didn't, many people ran over to congratulate him. Everyone witnessed how Xiang Nan managed to survive step by step. From the initial additions to the group eliminations, Xiang Nan had not been treated fairly. But he survived. Mo Hai and Li Qingchuan were especially happy, because Xiang Nan was from their hometown and came from Wulong Prefecture. After the banquet had dissipated, Xiang Nan returned to Sun Palace. He lay calmly on the bed and silently looked at the dome of the palace. The arena competition was about to arrive, and the next battle would be a tough one. At that time, the top experts of the 12 sects would use their true strength to compete against each other. At that time, everyone would have no reservations. Master, I will use my own strength to prove that the people from my Sun Peak are the strongest. Xiang Nan yawned and gradually fell asleep. After sleeping for an unknown amount of time, he was surrounded by a sudden sense of danger. Even when a martial artist was asleep, they maintained great vigilance, and their perception of the outside world far surpassed that of ordinary people. Xiang Nan's vigilance towards killing intent far surpassed that of martial artists of the same realm. Xiang Nan suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't even have time to think. He immediately grabbed the giant saber and laid it horizontally in front of him. He felt a wave of killing intent coming from the direction of the door, but he could not see anything, nor could he hear the slightest sound of air piercing. But then, a terrifying impact force came from the outside of the giant saber. Ding! A crisp sound came from outside the blade. Following that, Xiang Nan felt as if he had been struck by the power of a mountain. He lay on the bed and quickly retreated. The wooden bed quickly slid backwards. Peng's voice crashed into the wall behind him and the wooden bed was smashed into pieces. As for Xiang Nan, he leaned heavily against the wall and leaned against a 3-meter diameter pit. Turning around, he saw that the pit was in the shape of a crack, and there were countless cracks. Xiang Nan's right hand, which was holding onto the giant saber, trembled slightly. He lowered his head and looked again. The thing that had just struck the giant saber had already landed on the ground. It was actually a black needle with thin hair. Without any hesitation, Xiang Nan grabbed the huge saber and chased after him in the direction of the door. When he rushed out of the room and arrived at the corridor, a black shadow disappeared from the exit of the corridor, which was the exit of Sun Palace. Flash shadow steps. Xiang Nan's body turned into an afterimage and instantly rushed out of the Sun Palace. The speed of that shadow was also astonishing. It was floating lightly in the mountain forest of the distant peak and disappearing again. Xiang Nan was shocked. It was at least 7 to 8 miles away from Sun Palace. What a fast speed! Xiang Nan refused to give up. He used his lightning vision and looked into the distance. There was a long, but very thin scratch of yuan qi fluctuations in the air. Pine. Yuan qi wings spread out, and Xiang Nan continued to chase after him. However, when they reached the place where the black shadow of the distant peak disappeared, the shadow disappeared. What was even stranger was that the remaining yuan qi fluctuations in the air had disappeared. It was as if the person who ambushed him had suddenly disappeared from the world. Xiang Nan's heart was heavy. What was going on? The Haoran sect was heavily guarded, and it was impossible for outsiders to sneak in easily. Even though tens of thousands of outer sect disciples had entered the Haoran sect during the 12 joint examinations, the Haoran sect still did not relax its vigilance. Could it be, a thought flashed through Xiang Nan's mind. Could it be that the people who ambushed him had always been hiding in the nature sect? Or as a spectator, or directly as a contestant? Hongbin, Jiangqing. Impossible. Xiang Nan immediately overturned his speculation. Although Hongbin was strong, he was still far inferior to the person who ambushed him tonight. He was not even on the same level. However, since he was able to block that person's black needle with his giant saber, it meant that that person's realm would not be ridiculously high. At most, it was within the same range as him, and the difference between the upper and lower realms would not exceed 2 small realms. However, this was the most terrifying part. Amongst martial artists of the same realm, was there such a powerful expert? Xiang Nan looked at the black needle in his hand and couldn't help but gasp. What kind of hair-like black needle was that? It was simply a strand of hair. Xiang Nan's heart grew heavier and heavier. How strong was this yuan qi to nail his saber with a single strand of hair and knock him to that extent? Right now, it was the 12 joint examinations, and someone had secretly entered the Haoran sect, specifically targeting him. In addition, there were 3 experts who tried to snatch Musweki away. Xiang Nan. Suddenly, a female voice appeared in Xiang Nan's ears. Xiang Nan turned around and slashed. "Aya, you scolded me last time. Are you going to kill me this time?" The man stretched out a finger and pressed it against the blade, making it impossible for Xiang Nan's saber to move at all. But upon closer inspection, Xiang Nandaki said, "Is that you? The person who ambushed me just now was also you. The one who came was the heavenly devil religion's demonic woman, Dream." Meng Dai giggled, "How could I be willing to kill you? It's too late to properly love you. Why are you still here? Are you courting death? You actually dared to sneak into the outer perimeter of the nature sect? You haven't left yet?" Xiang Nan asked in shock. Sun Peak was the most remote mountain peak. Just now, Xiang Nan had chased after the sneak attacker and had already left the boundaries of the Haoran sect. Meng Dai giggled and said, "I didn't leave. I'm staying here to be someone you like. What time is this? You're still spouting nonsense. Quickly leave." Xiang Nan shouted. "You care about me? I knew it." Meng Dai smiled excitedly. Then, her expression became serious and she said, "Master called me back. I have to leave now, but this time, I came to see you not just to say goodbye." As she spoke, Meng Dai lowered her voice and said, "I've been staying in Haotian City for a while and found some very strange things and strange people." "What do you mean?" Xiang Nan's heart skipped a beat. The dream butterfly said, "Someone might want to deal with the nature sect, or they might come for the joint examination of the 12 sections. Those people are secretive, and each of them is an expert amongst the experts. I've been secretly tracking them for a while, and I've even fought with a few of them. However, those people are very strong. After being seriously injured by me, they managed to escape. As expected, Xiang Nan had a bad premonition. But aren't you from the Heavenly Devil sect? Why did you suddenly help the Haran sect? Xiang Nan asked. I said, I want to be a woman that you like. Dream Butterfly quickly wiped Xiang Nan's face and said, take care of yourself. I have to hurry back. This is a map. When I was searching for them these days, I found a few of their gathering points. Perhaps I didn't mark them complete enough. These are just a few of them. If you're worried, go find your master and ask her to help you investigate. However, you must not act recklessly. If you die, I will become a widow. Meng Dai touched Xiang Nan again and flew away with a giggle. Xiang Nan blocked it for a moment and couldn't help but say helplessly, this witch has been talking nonsense all day. As he spoke, he spread out the scroll. This was a map of Haotian City that could be bought anywhere, but there were 4 places marked with red ink. The 4 places were all located on the outskirts of Haotian City. Chapter 259 Help. After returning to Sun Palace, Xiang Nan thought about this matter over and over again. The more he thought about it, the stronger his bad premonition became. He looked at the strand of hair in his hand, his heart extremely heavy. After dawn, he decided to go out and take a look. If he followed the map given by Meng Dai, he might be able to find some clues. Xiang Nan was very thoughtful. Meng Dai once said that she was worried about Xiang Nan's safety, so she asked Xiang Nan to find Su Kaiyu and investigate this matter together. But after thinking about it, Xiang Nan was still prepared to probe first. What if this was a trap set by the Heavenly Devil religion? Perhaps the true goal of the Heavenly Demon sect was Master Su Kaiyu, and if he foolishly pulled Master into another person's ambush, wouldn't he be guilty of an extremely heinous crime? The crux of the matter was, up until now, he still didn't know who the enemy was. Was it the Heavenly Devil religion? Or someone else? How much can Meng Dai believe? Or perhaps she did not lie to herself, but her master lied to her. No, I can't. It's hard for me not to make a trip. Xiang Nan sat up and took advantage of today's rest to investigate the enemy's background. When he reached the main entrance of the Haran sect, he saw a familiar figure. Murong Wanqing was standing outside the gate of the Haran sect, arguing fiercely with a few handsome and upright men. The men looked to be in their early 20s to 25 or 16 years of age, and they were all extremely frightening. The strongest man was already at the late Heaven Origin realm, about the 8th to 9th Heaven Origin realm. Xiang Nan was still unable to ascertain exactly how many of them were. Die this heart of yours. Even if I die, I will not agree. Murong Wanqing's mood was very unstable. She shouted angrily at the men. When Xiang Nan saw this scene, he immediately rushed forward. Xiang Nan. Murong Wanqing and the others immediately discovered Xiang Nan. Standing beside Murong Wanqing, Xiang Nan stared at the powerful men and said in a deep voice, Wanqing, is there trouble? The men looked at Xiang Nan with great interest. One of them hugged his shoulders and said, Oh, isn't this Xiang Nan of the Nature sect? Why is there you everywhere? Do you still want to get involved here? Xiang Nan's eyes narrowed slightly. He had already touched the storage ring and was ready to pull out the giant saber at any time. Murong Wanqing looked at Xiang Nan gratefully and said, Xiang Nan, you misunderstood. These are all my brothers. When Xiang Nan heard this, he felt extremely embarrassed. He hurriedly cupped his fists and said, "So it was a few brothers." Xiang Nan was reckless without asking the reason. "I hope that you brothers don't get angry." The oldest man nodded at Xiang Nan repeatedly, his face full of praise. "Young man, you can do it. Even though you know that your realm is inferior to ours, you're willing to stand up for Shaoqing. Not bad, you're a friend. Shaoqing didn't make any friends for nothing." Murong Wanqing said, "Thank you, Xiang Nan." Xiang Nan rubbed his nose and said, "Since you are all family, I won't blindly interfere here. Murong Wanqing, I'll see you in the arena tomorrow." After saying that, Xiang Nan immediately turned around and left. Taking advantage of the fact that it was still early, he took a look around Haotian City to see if he could discover any suspicious people. However, Haotian City was simply too large. Even if he rode the night-bladed leopard and ran wildly through the city, he would probably not have enough time to travel around every corner of Haotian City. He took out the map and looked at the 4 red areas marked by the dream butterfly. He thought to himself that he only had these 4 clues. I don't know if those mysterious people will go to those 4 areas again, but there's no other way now. I can only brave it and try it first. I really can't think of another way. Thinking of this, he found a deserted place and unfurled his Yuan Qi feathered wings to fly into the sky. The first target area was located to the east of Haotian City. When they arrived at their destination, they discovered that it was just an ordinary forest area in the suburbs. The place marked by the dream butterfly was precisely an open space in this forest. This place was located at the edge of the Haran mountain range. This is the place. Xiang Nan walked up to the empty space and looked around. He then used his lightning vision to carefully search the area. Unfortunately, no traces could be found. Perhaps it was because the interval between them was too long, and there was no residual Yuan Qi fluctuations in the air at all. He walked to the center of the clearing and bent down to squeeze a small clump of dirt in his hand, mixed with a small amount of ashes. It seems that not long ago, there was a bonfire here. But Xiang Nan frowned. There were a total of 4 areas marked by the dream butterfly, and he only had 1 person. How could he monitor these 4 places at the same time? Moreover, he still had to compete, so he couldn't just stay here and not leave. How about letting Shen Linhai, Luo Yuan and the others help him? No. Those mysterious people had already ambushed him once last night. Perhaps they would also target Luo Yuan and his group, so they couldn't catch them all in one go. Thinking of this, Xiang Nan subconsciously touched his storage ring and took out 5 eagle eyes. These 5 eagle eyes were seized from the sneer-masked man in 100 Beast City. Furthermore, they were 5 unnumbered eagle eyes that had not been used once. He didn't know if there was another secret in the eagle's eye. If he took the risk and was detected by the big shots in Haojing, he would reveal his identity if he followed along. On second thought, even if the great figures of Haojing came, they would not be afraid. There were signs of the activities of those mysterious people here. The great figures of Haojing suspected those mysterious people, but they would not suspect themselves, a dignified disciple of the Haoran sect. Thinking of this, Xiang Nan dug a small hole in the ground with his bare hands and buried an eagle's eye in it. He was very cautious. He had even considered the small details of digging a pit. He directly used his hands to dig the pit, instead of using a more relaxed method to explode the pit with his Yuan Qi. The purpose was to not leave behind any Yuan Qi fluctuations and to expose the eagle's eye. Afterwards, he similarly buried an eagle's eye in the other 3 marked locations. 4 of the 5 eagle eyes were buried, and 1 was kept by Xiang Nan. Once someone spoke in any of the 4 regions, it would be transmitted to Xiang Nan through the eagle eyes. Without knowing how feasible this was, Xiang Nan thought for a moment and could only return to the Haran sect to wait quietly. By the time he finished, it was already afternoon. Xiang Nan returned to the main entrance of the sect and found Murom Wanqing standing there, but her brothers were no longer there. You haven't left yet? Xiang Nanqi said. Murom Wanqing said with an awkward expression, I wait for someone. This was the first time Xiang Nan had seen such an expression on Murom Wanqing's face since he met her. I have a favor to ask you to help me. As Murom Wanqing spoke, her face turned red. Chapter 260. Pull a long face snoot. Tell me, as long as I can do it, I will go through fire and water without hesitation. Xiang Nan did not even ask and agreed. During this period of time, Murom Wanqing and the others had taken good care of Xiang Nan. No matter what trouble they encountered, they were willing to stand with Xiang Nan. Actually, in his heart, Xiang Nan had already treated Murom Wanqing, Luo Yuan and the others as his life and death brothers. Those people were willing to seek revenge on Hong Bin for their own sake, regardless of the danger of being kicked out of the match. What else could they not do for them? But when Murom Wanqing made her request, Xiang Nan immediately shook his head. No, I definitely can't help you with this. Aren't you kidding me? Murom Wanqing said anxiously. Xiang Nan. What do I do to you? Good is good. Xiang Nan scratched his head, wondering, but how can you let me pretend to be your lover? Alright, you won't help me. Then from now on, you and I will be completely grateful to each other. Murom Wanqing said angrily with her eyes wide open. Xiang Nan hurriedly said, You woman, why have you always been so angry? It's not that I refuse to help, but Besides, my identity isn't enough. Why don't you look for Shen Linhai, Feng Zhaoqi, and Luo Yuan? In terms of family background, they are the ones that match you the best. Murom Wanqing said angrily, If I can find them, why would I want to find you? They were friends who played with me from childhood to adulthood. Do you think my father would believe it? You saw it during the day. My brothers came to inform me first. Tonight, my father will arrive at Haotian City. He wants to betroth me to a young master from a noble family in another province. If you don't help me, I can only hope for death. I will never marry a man I don't like. But Xiang Nan hesitated. In his previous life, he was an orphan, so he valued kinship more than the heavens in his current life. He was unwilling to help Murom Wanqing to lie to her biological father. Murom Wanqing smiled miserably and said, I have always been strong. I have to do everything better than others, even more powerful than those men. I just want to prove to my father that I am no worse than anyone else. Do you know how much pain I have endured and how much tiredness I have received for this? This sentence touched Xiang Nan's weak spot. Yes, how much pain and suffering would a boy have to endure if he wanted to enter the world of martial arts? Not to mention a girl, not to mention that this girl did better than others. The children of small clans had their own troubles, and the great clans also had their own sorrows. For large aristocratic families, the children of aristocratic families were often just bargaining chips in the business world. The Murom clan was a huge force in Donghai province, but it was extremely difficult for them to spread such a force to other provinces, and Murom Wanqing had become a bargaining chip for this kind of commercial marriage. She tried her best to make herself more outstanding, but what she got from her excellence was not her father's disdain, but her use value. Only now did Xiang Nan truly get to know Murom Wanqing. Only then did he know under what circumstances she had been nurtured with such a character that she always wanted to be an expert. To be honest, Xiang Nan loved her very much at this moment. While Murong Wanqing was speaking, Luo Yuan and the other four also heard the news that Murong Wanqing's father was coming and rushed over. "Alright, I'll help you once." Xiang Nan was ruthless. As a friend, wasn't it at the most difficult time for others to lend a helping hand? "Xiang Nan, good boy." Luo Yuan patted Xiang Nan on the shoulder and said, "We haven't misjudged you. You deserve our trust." Shen Linhai smiled and nodded. However, Murong clan master's temper is very similar to Sunset. You need to be mentally prepared in advance. Feng Shaoqi lowered his head and said, "Perhaps the Murong clan's clan master will get angry and want to get rid of Xiang Nan." Jiang Yu smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. Isn't there still the four of us? We will definitely protect Xiang Nan well. Although the Murong clan's clan master is very powerful, he shouldn't offend the four of us. Just to kill Xiang Nan." Xiang Nan was crying and laughing repeatedly when he heard this, but since he had already agreed, he could not return temporarily. "Xiang Nan, thank you." Murong Wanqing stared at Xiang Nan seriously and said, "I will remember this kindness in my heart." Xiang Nan shook his head solemnly, "You all treat me like a brother, and I also treat you as my brothers. Don't say anything else about kindness or anything else." "Ha, alright then." Luo Yuan hugged Xiang Nan's shoulder and said, "Since you are going to meet some of the most important people in Donghai province at night, your future father-in-law that you have never met before, we have to dress you up properly." The words future father-in-law made Xiang Nan and Murong Wanqing blush. Afterwards, regardless of how Xiang Nan refused, the few fellows forcefully pulled him to the center of Haotian City. This central area was not the center of the geographic location, but the most prosperous eastern district of Haotian City, the wealthy area. The scenery of the east side was very different from that of the other districts. There weren't so many passers-by here anymore. On both sides of the wide road, there were luxurious carriages parked. Every single one of them was worth an astonishing amount of money. Even the trees on both sides of the road were snow fragrance trees specially purchased from the western regions. The leaves of these trees were snow white and emitted a faint sweet smell. When the leaves fell, they would be as beautiful as falling snow. There was hardly any loud noise here. Everyone pulled Xiang Nan into a garment shop. "Originally, I was going to customize a set of clothes for you, but it's too late. I can only buy them off the shelf." As a woman, she was choosing clothes for Xiang Nan with her unique eyes. The messenger of this clothing shop was neatly dressed, had a pair of beautiful beards, and spoke and behaved very appropriately, making people feel comfortable in their hearts. As expected of wealthy people. Xiang Nan looked at the clothes hanging on the wall and couldn't help but praise them. The cheapest clothes here were all priced at more than 10,000 gold coins, which was equivalent to the total income of an ordinary person working for 10 years. "Come to Xiang Nan. Try on these 20 sets of long clothes." Jiang Yu walked over and 10 maids followed him. Each maidservant respectfully held 2 sets of folded long clothes in her hands. "So much? There's no need." Xiang Nan frowned and said, "Just look for anyone to wear." "No way." Jiang Yu said solemnly, "Clothes are a person's second face. How can they fit?" Novel Empire. Immortal God of Battle.